Oh boy. Class is going to be fun today.
Boy, yo, 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 yo.
You actually have two guest lecturers today because Chris and Adam, we're going to take a step out of this. Who's going to be sitting in my chair is Leviathan because he's a very biblical creature that's a very large animal that may or may not have existed, but he existed on a higher plane.
See, I'm going to take the other angle. I'm going to go with Karoti.
Karoti, yeah.
And yeah, you're not having a stroke. You're fine. The name will make sense when we get a little bit deeper into this topic. We're going through the gate. We're going through Heaven's Gate.
And if we started this out weird, just to understand that this is one of the rare cult episodes that we're going to do. And no matter how weird you think that intro was, it's going to get weirder.
I think I've watched too much of his videos, and I see him in my nightmares now.
Marshall Applewhite is one of the scarier people I think that's ever existed. He has a lot of that...
serial killer eye?
I was going to say Pat Robertson.
Okay.
To me, they feel like they kind of have a similar gaze.
But them. Like when you're talking and your eyes are so wide that you can see the white on the top and the bottom of your irises, you're just like, too much eye contact.
But Heaven's Gate might be a cult that people look at as like the cult. And I think it's a little bit of recency bias. I understand that what we're going to talk about happens over a very long stretch of time, but 1997 is kind of the zenith of this whole entire operation.
Do you think that people see this as more of a cult than Jonestown? Because it's more recent, I think.
Yes.
Okay.
That, and then also I think too, right around the time that this happened, it's just a matter of timing for everything, because 1997, when news is cranking, we have the 24-hour news cycle after OJ and everything like that people want to be updated and they want to know. There's a national focus on these videos that are coming out.
There's also a thirst for fucked up shit. People have already, because of the news cycle, people have already gotten to the point where like, I just want to be fucking shocked. And so you're also going to try to give more of a spotlight to shocking stories. I think it also plays into the fact that Jonestown on a scale of fucking death was much larger, but that happened in a jungle in South America. Mm-hmm. This happened essentially right in San Diego, California, in a really affluent neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably, and because it happened more recently, people have, much stronger memory of it. But yeah, Bonnie Nettles and Marshall Applewhite, what a pair.
And as far as cults go, again, this is not coming from somebody with a degree in cultology or the study or anything like that. I just really like cults. I've looked into a lot of them. To me, this cult is pretty atypical compared to all of the other cults. Not to say that their methods of gaining followers gaining followers are different. Keeping followers was a completely different ballgame, or around the same thing. They just use different methods to control the people. Instead of like brainwashing them and firing a bunch of information at them all at once, you're throwing the entire Bible at them. It's just a reference. Not saying the Bible is a cult major, but throwing the Bible at them, Book of Laws, whatever you want to use. They just allowed these people to come to the conclusion to seek more knowledge themselves. And that's where this whole idea of this illusion of choice comes from for the way that they would get their cult members, and then the way that they would keep them under their thumb. There wasn't a threat of violence. There wasn't a threat of harming any family. There wasn't a threat of, well, nobody's going to believe anything that you tell them about this place because you're you and I have this image. They were free to go if they wanted to. They would be given a bus fare if they had to leave to go home.
That's why it's so fascinating. Like, without that fear, like Jonestown happens because of the isolation. Nobody has no, where are you going to go in the middle of the fucking jungle? You're in another country. How do you get home? You've sunk all your money into this. Whereas this is like, California's like at our doorstep. Like they'll give me bus fare to get anywhere. So what was it about Heaven's Gate that kept people there if they weren't being basically physically kept there? I do have one favor to ask of everybody. While we're talking about Bonnie Nettles and Marshall Applewhite, think of the Culps from Saturday Night Live, Will Ferrell and Anna Gasteyer, the church couple that sing the songs, because I believe that that's what these two were kind of like as a comparison of cult leaders.
Yeah, A lot of this stuff is going to be a little bit heavy, so we have to be able to associate it with something that makes this more palatable. Just to get out in front of it, I should have waited for 15 minutes to bring this up. We're going to be talking about suicide. It's not a comfortable topic for a lot of people. I understand. It's affected people in a multitude of ways, whether it be family, friends, anything like that. We're not going to be making fun of it. If you've listened to this podcast before, you understand that we try to use humor to get through some kind of these harder topics and harder things. So we're not making light of it. It's just the easiest way to disseminate this information.
You got to laugh or you're going to cry.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of that. All right. Remember, guys, wherever you listen to your podcast, leave us reviews as high as you can. Keep sending it in the comments. Go hit the YouTube. Right now, it's just for audio only and everything, but Adam does put some art up there, so you guys will have that to look at. And it's just another avenue to kind of communicate with us.
Yeah.
You got anything else before we start?
No, let's get in.
All right, here we go. Okay, who are we meeting first?
Marshall made a bad name choice. Marshall Herf Applewhite.
Marshall Herf did not name himself.
No.
He was a junior.
I'd have gone by Herf. I wouldn't have gone by Marshall. I'd have gone by Herf. Herf
Really?
sounds like a good time. Herf sounds like the weird guy in the group that you hang out with that
Herf's-
maybe drinks more than everybody else.
Herf sounds like a fucking cult leader, man.
Marshall doesn't sound much better. You're clouded by the dog in Paw Patrol, I think. Isn't there a Marshall in there?
Marshall Mathers.
Yeah, but also kind of a scary individual. Stan?
Yeah, but not like this.
Okay. Well, Marshall Herf Applewhite, this number blew me away. Born May 17th, 1931. This dude was born in the Depression. To Marshall Sr., as Chris mentioned, in Louise, in Spur, Texas. I believe the population of Spur is 1,000 people now, so I don't know if they saw a mass exodus, but it was probably pretty small back then.
Home of Marshall Applewhite.
I don't think that signs up
You don't
anywhere.
think that signs up?
He did have 3 siblings. His dad was a Presbyterian minister who kept a very religious family. And in doing so, in being this minister, he was kind of the spreader, the church builder in South Texas, as far as they were moving around a whole hell of a lot.
This has got to be a common theme. I don't know if it's because we've done a smaller amount of these cult episodes, but we're already, 2 for 3? No, Okay, so we've done... Well, Manson didn't really get a start out in religion, did he?
No, neither did Jones.
Jones went into doing that.
But Jim Jones was a wild man. Both of his parents were kind of degenerates.
Okay, but what I'm saying is there's always this connection essentially from starting out from a ministerial standpoint and learning the skills, the same fucking skills that people go in and hear from people going, speaking in, I guess, more recognized churches.
Yeah, if we didn't have that bad old lady that gave Jim Jones the apple pie that day and invited him to church, we may have never had Jim Jones. If we didn't have Charles Manson reading the book in prison on how to make people like you or how to be more likable to other people, we might not have had Manson. Manson, I don't really think quite focused on religion as much as he did vibes and just the times that he was in.
I think that also comes down to what his kind of age demographic was. It wasn't people interested in that. It was more people interested in the opposite, which is probably why he shied away from it. I'm just saying it's kind of weird that the skills that you learn, if you want to be a cult leader, okay, I want to go to cult leader school. What do I start on? They're you need to go become a minister because they will teach you how to talk and make people believe shit.
And that's just it. There's a very fine line between religion and cultism. And we talked about it a lot during those episodes, and we're talking about a whole hell of a lot during this episode. But as far as his upbringing, he was raised very religious. In the way that his father was going around and building these other churches, he didn't have a lot of time to set down roots to kind of create anything outside of his familial unit. You can't grow a group of friends.
No stability.
Yeah, you can't grow a group of friends in the 30s in Texas when you're just moving around from place to place. He would attend Corpus Christi High School, so they'd settle down enough for him to actually attend that high school. He would then go off to Austin College. He was very active in student organizations, and not even the religious ones. He loved acting. He loved singing. They said that he had a baritone voice. I don't know what the fuck that means. I don't know what
it's a deep one, which is very odd because hearing him talk in the videos, you don't see it.
You don't see a boisterous voice coming out of somebody who's so meek and mild. But at the same time, this is where his interest lied, and this is where I think he sort of began to be able to spread his wings because he had a little bit of stability being in these areas and meeting other people. He also signed up to study pre-theology, which just like before you would go into a ministry, which is eventually what he does after he earns his bachelor's in philosophy, which totally down the line for somebody who's going to get into the theories of thought that he does.
Which is also weird. Like, what was a philosophy degree in 1952?
Yeah, probably just the classics, just Plato and Aristotle and what they thought.
So he graduates, gets a bachelor's degree in philosophy. Then I think that's when he enrolled at the Presbyterian School to study theology. So now, basically, to my understanding, philosophy is essentially trying to think of things outside of the context of religion, right?
It is secular, more secular in nature, but it's just like a different way of looking at anything, I would say.
Okay. So he gets this structure of one, and now he's going into this other area. He's gathering, like, in a weird way, he's gathering these weird tools.
Yeah, that he's keeping in his alien utility belt. While he was at Union Presbyterian, he ended up meeting Ann Pierce, who he would then marry. They had 2 children, Mark and Lane. Mark, I believe it was a son and a daughter, because we'll get stories from his daughter later on. He didn't love the ministry as much as he loved music. It was too tempting to try to pass up on this potential career in music that he ended up leaving the seminary. And this is where I don't understand how things worked back then, and I think just religion in itself. He wanted to pursue a career in music, so he became a music director for a Presbyterian church in North Carolina. Like, how does that start your music career? Do you get paid to be a choral director?
Yeah. I was trying to think of this too, like how big this church had to be. You're also, so hey, where did you come from? Oh, I actually left the seminary. And you want to be our musical director here at the church? He's like, yeah. I'm like, oh, okay. But yeah, to think of that as a full-time job, like, what do you do? He's like, I'm the musical director of a church. This isn't a fucking Joel Osteen giant fucking mega church. I just imagine some like white steeple, and they're like, yeah, we have a musical director on payroll.
And even then, I mean, I guess just growing up Mormon, like, our music directors were just people that volunteered, people that were called to do it. They didn't get paid. They would show up after their job and go do it. So I don't know how that gets your career started, unless, like you're saying, it was a big church that had a following. But I don't think there's a lot of folks coming from Nashville to North Carolina to listen to choir directors. Like, it doesn't make sense.
He doesn't do it for long, though. In 54, he gets drafted into service.
That also doesn't make sense to me, too. 54 was the Korean War. We drafted, I'm sure we talked about it during that episode and I just forgot. There was a draft for the Korean War too.
Maybe.
That's just wild to me.
So he ends up going into the Signal Corps.
Which is, from what I Googled, it was like...
The radio men?
Yes.
Okay.
So also another tool in your utility belt when you can learn to directly communicate an idea very clearly.
True.
Or to code a message to try to get it across. That's going to be something that plays a big role in it.
Yeah.
I don't understand why he was in Austria.
Oh, I mean, we had, in 54, we still had, occupation forces. Think of, like, Berlin.
So you were drafted to be an occupational force?
You could be drafted, essentially, probably to go over and serve, like, a required tour or something like that. So it was just like being at one of our bases that's in another country. You might not necessarily be in like a conflict zone or doing any of that, but you have to staff the base.
So, but like since you were drafted, you weren't drafted to solely go to war. You were just drafted to fill the ranks.
I kind of think that's what it was. I'd have to look more into it. Does that for 2 years, ends up coming out of it in 56, and then goes to University of Colorado where he gets his master's in music.
Music teaching, kind of just to be able to.
If you get yours in music, then you're allowed to teach that.
Yeah, to set everything up. But again, these bright lights are calling. He knows what he's got in that sweet, sweet baritone voice, whatever that sounds like. I wish that we would have had a video of him singing just so I could kind of get a gauge on how good this guy was. He heads off to New York. He takes the family up to New York, which I'm sure is a very stark difference from the places he's been in Texas and North Carolina,
big city, baby.
Colorado. Excuse me. After he again flames out in New York, where do you go after New York? You got all that culture in your life. You got to go somewhere important, right? The University of Alabama.
That's
You're going down to Bama.
It didn't work in New York. What's about as opposite of New York as we can get? We're heading for Alabama.
And Nick Saban has clouded my views of Alabama pretty heavily. But back then, it was probably not a massive school of prominence. Obviously, it was definitely the biggest school in Alabama still, but I don't know if it quite had the cachet that it does now. Or maybe that's just coming from a sports perspective.
The cash to pay players to come there?
Yeah.
Who knows how long Alabama was doing that?
That's true. Doesn't have a real great career at Alabama. Things go pear-shaped pretty quickly. He ends up getting fired for having a sexual relationship with a male student, which I'm sure the people at Alabama were very accepting of. It had to have probably been like, hey, we're doing this because you slept with a student, not that it was a gay relationship.
Correct. You were two consenting adults regarding that, but there is a code of conduct here at this university in which you can't plow your students. I think that was much more secondary to the fact of, that it was, a
male student.
Mm-hmm.
His wife didn't like this either. They would separate. I think it was like 3 years later, they would get a full-blown divorce.
68, divorced. And then he attempts to come out to his father and is completely rejected and basically kind of ostracized from the family.
And I think that plays a massive role kind of coming up in a little bit because he felt the rejection from a family that had loved him his entire life. And so if you lose somebody without either making amends or feeling like you need to make it up to him, you're going to have some feelings about that.
I feel like, and I'm going to try not to get too far ahead of myself because we're going to start talking about Bonnie here in just a second.
Yep.
But I feel like the reason that this thing works, and I'm not saying it works so well, but I'm saying it worked.
You can. All. We're in the trust tree. It's a cult episode. You can say that.
Well, I mean, based on their premise, I guess the success of this ties into the fact that Applewhite got caught at a time in his life where he was just looking for a life raft, something to hold on to. And he had this skill set, this orator skill set, this captivating skill set. He could talk to people, he could sing, he could entertain, but he didn't have, he didn't have the content. He didn't have the idea. He could execute it, but he needed an idea. Bonnie comes along. And Bonnie has that idea, but she doesn't have the other set of skills.
She's not an orator.
If her skill set would have her talking to somebody and them just being like, oh no, you're crazy. No one's listening to you about this. Where she could relay that information through him, you might have a few people being like, or most of the people being like, you're crazy. But then some people are going to be like, tell me more about this.
Yeah.
And what brings him down to this level where, and again, this isn't, saying that Marshall Applewhite was a victim in this because he kept his train rolling, but kind of looking at it from the who recruited who or who was kind of in charge on this. In 1972, Applewhite's father dies.
We got a little bit to give for that.
Okay. Sorry.
We still got to go to Houston.
Oh, that's right.
We got to go to Houston where I think Marshall starts feeling himself. Because in 1965, after him and Ann separate, Applewhite moves to Houston, where he runs the music department for the University of St. Thomas. He serves as a choral director in an Episcopal church. He performed with the Houston Grand Opera, which tells me that he probably had to have some chops. At this point in time, he was kind of exploring his sexuality into being more open as far as his relationships, which I don't think there was a real budding gay scene in Houston in 1965, but there was probably an area, a Castro district of sorts in Houston where this happened. So he kind of opens himself up to just trying to figure his sexuality out a little bit. I think he's still got the monkey on his back from his parents. Huh?
I think it's Montrose.
Huh.
Because I've been down to Houston. And everything, and I think that area, what you're considering that nowadays, I think it's called Montrose.
Okay. Starts a relationship up.
Random thing to know.
Well, whatever the neighborhood was, he starts spending a little time there. He gets involved with another woman. That doesn't really end up going well. He ends up being fired from the University of St. Thomas. They said it was for sickness. Great chance that he banged another student. Just judging by the way that he's trying to figure his sexuality out and who he's around, there's a good chance that it happens again.
The way that he addresses it later on in some of the stuff Heaven's Gate kind of enacts as far as their guidelines or the rules or the steps they take, I see this as someone who he's gay.
Mm-hmm. Probably bi, but yeah.
And because of his upbringing, I think and especially with his family and his kids, I think he's feeling a ton of shame.
Yeah.
Just because also where society is at that standpoint, also the places that he's probably going.
For sure.
So I think when this happens with the student and his life kind of crumbles around him, he's like, I'm not gonna do that thing again that caused my life to collapse. So he tries to start dating again, tries to, he ends up dating a woman for a while, right?
Yeah.
And I think essentially he just gets into a situation where he lets himself just be himself again. And then that happens. And all of a sudden now he's right back to that point.
Yeah. It's like, you're not always a coke addict, but sometimes when you drink, you call your dealer.
Yeah. But it's him putting himself in that mindset of being like, he's punishing himself. The reason he's getting depressed is because he still feels guilty about this thing he's doing.
For sure. Yeah. I think the guilt played just a major role in his life. The most out of left field shit that could possibly happen. He ends up moving to New Mexico and opens up a sandwich shop.
Yeah.
I don't know how in the
delicatessen.
How in the hell that even comes on his radar, but he was moderately successful. Until, as you stated, his father dies. And he kind of crumbles and goes to hell and ends up having to borrow money from friends, stay on their couches. Just, he can't put himself back together after this father that rejected him for being gay. He dies, and there's really no kind of finality to their relationship.
There's no possibility at that point for reconciliation.
No.
That's been, that option has been ripped away from him. He's got mounting debt. He's pretty much, probably the first when he lost the wife and kids, probably, but he's near that point of a low point in his life.
Do you think they had to pay
child support?
Yeah, back then.
I would imagine. Well,
in the 60s? That feels like a more recent adaptation.
Thinking Mad Men right now. I know that was 50s. I think that might have been 50s, 60s. I don't see those guys being required to pay child support, if I'm being honest with you.
Probably not. So let's switch gears. Let's jump out of Marshall and let's get deep into
There
Bonnie.
was no need. 50s and 60s, your wife, you just smack your wife around, she's not allowed to leave you.
That's true, yeah. Why would you be beholden to these children and this wife if she made you mad enough to divorce her?
Ironically, just so nobody freaks the fuck out.
Yeah, it's incredible that we've come as far as we have with how bad we were before. But yeah, let's jump into Bonnie. Bonnie Lou Nettles.
So we leave Applewhite, one of the lowest points in his life, and let's talk about Bonnie.
He'll be back. Turns out Bonnie was there.
Yeah, their stories are going to come together, and we're going to talk about them together.
She was born August 29th, 1927. So if you're keeping score at home, that's 4 years older than Marshall. In Houston, Texas, to a Baptist family. As she moved away and went to college, she wasn't as faithful. She didn't have this same Baptist beliefs. It was kind of more of a social club for her at that point. She became a nurse. She married a guy named Joseph Segal Nettles, maybe a Steven Seagal somewhere in the family tree. They would have 4 kids. Their marriage started to fall apart around 1972 when, and again, there's no reason to sugarcoat this, she started summoning spirits and conducting regular seances with locals in their living room.
Okay, listen. Bored housewife. Doesn't have a lot of hobbies. Book club's not doing it for her. Some light, dark magic. You're just, hey, it's a phase. Let mommy burn her black candles and everything. This'll, snuff out in another few weeks and it'll be on to the next thing.
Well, that is until she meets the 19th century monk, Brother Francis.
Yes.
Brother Francis would come visit Bonnie. They would share astrological studies.
Do you see Brother Francis as I see Brother Francis?
Bowl cut in a monk's robe.
With the bald part on top. The bowl cut with the bald patch on top, wearing the robe with the rope around it.
Yep.
Okay, just making sure we're on the same page for Brother Francis.
I don't think there would be a 19th century monk.
God damn it, man! How the spirit that speaks to you isn't even the head guy.
He's
of
just
the
a
monastery.
random.
He's the brother. He's like, fuck. I was hoping for Father Francis, but I guess
Father Francis is busy. Brother Francis is here. Just a very odd turn of events. She started visiting fortune tellers. She studied astrology like she was doing with Brother Francis. This idea of theosophy.
Theosophy.
Theosophy. Yes, theosophy, which is kind of like a mixture of the occult and new age beliefs and just kind of a mishmash of shit that they kind of put under one banner to try to justify each other somehow.
And then just the occult. And then she just is, and then she doesn't hide. She just looks into the occult as one does.
She visits herself a fortune teller. This fortune teller tells her of her life and tells her that this tall, thin, pale man with white hair will come into her life and will change things for forever. Now, I'm not saying that 1972 there wasn't a glut of these gentlemen around, but I'd be willing to say that wouldn't be something that you would walk down the street and not see 2-3 of them.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to be pretty common, pretty typical for that time.
It's what was the medium guy's name? John Edwards.
Yeah.
And he would just point in the crowd. He's like, Dave, I'm getting a Dave. And he's like, 3 guys would stand up and he's like, I'm getting a John. John, do any of you have an association with a John? 2 of them are like, oh, yeah, a John. And then he just weeding out the information.
Yeah, well, I think he usually starts with like, I'm getting a J. I'm getting a strong J name. James, Jared, Jeff.
Until he sees someone, he's just watching the crowd. Yeah, I think this is one of those times when it's like, I'll give you a general description and you'll definitely at some point run into one of these people. And then if you don't, and you notice one, but you didn't talk to them, then I can just say, oh, not my fault. You missed your opportunity.
Well, yeah, and it's just a master of manipulation. Nobody ever goes to a fortune teller without a question on their mind, like without ever needing to know something and like thirsting for that interest.
And there's quite a bit less known about Bonnie. And I mean, there's a pretty good reason for that because she only makes it about halfway, a little less than halfway into the essentially the time frame that, well, actually, I can't even say that it has ended because Heaven's Gate is still a thing on a much, smaller and less, suicidally scale. But you basically have, because she wasn't the one around and the one that was in charge of it at that time, I don't think enough of as much of her past has been digged into. Well, and maybe it was just because she was married and had 4 kids. She wasn't moving around all the time. She was there that entire time in that area. Yeah.
She was the wizard behind the curtain.
Yes.
You don't really see her until the end. And the reason that we know about the monk and Francis and all that goofy shit is because this comes to play in her teachings. This is where we're heading with this whole cult idea. So now we come to the meeting, and this is, I was about to say the saddest part of this episode. Certainly not. It's the most frustrating for me because I feel like this would explain so much. This origin story of how these two meet. There's 4 different stories of how they meet. Marshall will tell it as he was visiting a sick friend in a hospital and Bonnie was the nurse that was taking care of him. Marshall's sister will say that he was having heart issues and needed emergency surgery on his heart. And Bonnie was a nurse during that procedure. Now, this starts to play into the thought of maybe this was like his life flashed before his eyes, or he had a near-death experience that might have changed him. The only real legitimacy that I would give to that is after he died and they performed the autopsy on him, they found out that he had pretty advanced heart disease.
Yeah,
so,
but this is so early on.
True, but there could have been signs, there could have been markers. There is a story that I believe her daughter tells, that Bonnie's daughter tells, of him being like he's a choral director.
Yeah, he's some type of music director at like a school or something like that.
He's running a stage play. Somebody gets injured. Marshall ends up taking him to the hospital, and that's where he meets Bonnie at the doors. Probably
that's the meet cute one. That's
yeah,
the meet cute one.
That's actually perfect.
And then the fourth is probably the most likely.
Yeah, and this is just kind of Occam's razor at this point in time, where he is massively depressed because of his dead father that never accepted him. He's trying to come to terms with that. His sandwich shop just went tits up, so that's going to bum you out a little bit too. He really has no footing in the world. The only kind of downside to this is I don't know if he was ever really mentally aware enough to check himself into a facility. But at the same time, if he did know that something was wrong and he had nowhere else to turn to, he may have checked himself into a mental institution. And as this legend goes, Bonnie was working as a nurse within the mental institution. She was attending to him. She started giving him hope by telling him these crazy things about aliens and about God and about Brother Francis. I'm sure she's like, dude, you gotta see him. He is hot. And Marshall's like, oh, I gotta suppress this, but this lady's what's saving my life. Maybe I'll take a look at him. There just had to be a little bit of something there.
So the story though that's told about it is basically what had happened is they end up meeting at the hospital. So let's pretend it isn't maybe a more likely scenario of the mental hospital, but the way that they tell it is he came into the hospital. Let's say it was for the reason of bringing in someone, and they started talking, and she was telling him some stuff probably about like astrology or what her beliefs were. And I think she offered him like a palm reading,
an astrological reading.
Reading. She's like, I need you to go get your birth certificate though, so I can see it. And he just happened to have his birth certificate with him. So he goes out to the car, comes back.
What a conveniently beautiful story.
No kidding. She gives him the reading, and during this reading, there is just this connection between them. All of a sudden, this premonition that this fortune teller told her this guy is right in front of her. He, kind of is filling in all the gaps. He seems enthusiastic. And for him, she's basically like giving him attention and has given him the possibility, because she also gives him like a reading or something like that that's supposed to like really uplift him.
Yeah, enough to where he commented that he felt that he had known her in a past life. That was how deep their connection was. And then she ramps up the crazy when she claims that aliens had told her that they would meet and that he had a divine assignment. So again, we're talking about aliens here, but we're also talking about divinity. We're talking about some special higher power of these aliens that called for him to do something special.
Regardless at this point, if he is checked into a supervised facility or anything like that, he is still in such like an emotionally just fragile, malleable state that, like I was saying, I think he's looking for a life draft. She's tossing one out. He's just fucking grabbing onto it. And guess what? It feels good. After all this shit that he's been having to do, it feels good to have this, regardless of his part of his brain having to be like, cuckoo, this stuff's a little crazy. He's just like, shut the fuck up. This makes me feel good. I want to see this. I want to see this through.
She's a nurse. She's not a patient here. It seems odd. So they would end up moving in together. They form this deep, loving, platonic, sexless relationship. And it was something that Applewhite said that he had really appreciated. Maybe this plays a little bit into his sexuality, that he was just looking for this non-physical relationship with a woman, to where he had a connection, to where outwardly it looked like they were in a loving relationship, but at the same time knowing that he doesn't have to touch icky titties.
Yeah.
Like, it's all a possibility. This is all conjecture, really. It's just there's certain things about Applewhite that lead you to believe that this is just kind of where he was sexually in his life, and we'll talk about how he tries to nix those things. Once her husband finds out about this, that's it. She ends up losing the children. Her husband gets full custody during the divorce.
4 kids.
4 children. 4 children. She just is willing to throw it all away for this white-haired creep that she just ran into that doesn't blink enough.
So, like, I'm trying to kind of break this down in my head. Obviously, if she is willing to just be all right with giving that stuff up, she already had this planned out, or she had already had this to some degree in her head. She just needed someone to help her execute this, or needed someone to believe it so much that was all the confirmation she needed to keep pursuing it. And I think he came along and he gave her that. And all of a sudden, with his ability to kind of like take this information and possibly be something that he could send out to the masses to get her message out, that was kind of what she had been waiting for.
Well, and it's a full-blown codependent relationship, because Nettles would reinforce all of Applewhite's delusions, then Applewhite would reinforce all of Nettles' beliefs. So they had to work together in kind of this harmonious, crazy circle to really think about expounding upon it. And yeah, you're totally right. She sees that Applewhite's a fairly decent talker. He has a little bit of personality to where they might be able to start building something.
Yeah. Well, how do you start building something?
You open up the Christian Arts Book Center, which did not last long. They started teaching theosophy. They leaned into the mysticism angle. Nobody signed up for these classes. It just did not happen where they were in life in Houston. It wasn't going to make anything happen. As soon as that flops, Marshall does the very chivalrous thing and steals a rental car, just doesn't return a rental car, so they could begin traveling to start teaching their beliefs. And this was happening February 1973. They didn't start out very well because they didn't really have a plan. They had a set of beliefs, but they didn't really have anything fleshed out.
Okay, well, hold on. Timeline-wise, so February 73, that's actually when they first go out and hit the road.
Yep.
So they start traveling at that point. And then in August, it wasn't until August of 74 that he was arrested.
Yeah, no, it went really, really bad on this trip. Their trip sucked so bad that they ended up having to give plasma and just do odd jobs to try to finance this traveling circus that they were trying to commit.
Well, circus implies that there's multiple people other than 2. And so that doesn't even come into play. So they hit the road February 1973. It wasn't until May of 74 that they actually got their first convert to, follow him, Sharon Morgan, who abandons her kids. I think she had 2 kids, and travels with them for a while. And again, they're just traveling around, just kind of living kind of hand to mouth, little odd jobs that they can do. They're camping in campgrounds, probably places where they also shouldn't be. And eventually she does end up coming back to her kids, thank fucking Christ. But
this is where Sharon's story kind of gets diluted a little bit. I don't know if it was necessarily I believe she gets more credit than she's allowed. Because as she's traveling with them, they believe that they were on this, to steal a line from Blues Brothers, a mission from God. So they would go into restaurants to eat, and they would just dine and dash and leave on the check. And Sharon would be like, well, why are you doing that? That's against the law. And like, mission from God, can't do it. And as they're teaching her, she's asking questions to where Applewhite and Bonnie don't have this fleshed out enough to be able to answer them clearly.
what do they call the kitchen? The Nutrilab?
Yes.
Oh yeah, we don't pay at Nutrilabs. We're just there as a fuel station for our vehicles, and then you're not supposed to pay at the Nutrilab.
Well, along with that, and along with them just kind of telling her to hush and be quiet while they do their teachings instead of just answering her questions, they start kind of asking her to use her credit card to pay for things. So I'd imagine, and they do go back, they have a meeting with Sharon's family, and she does end up going back with her family. But I would assume the time that she spent with them, she kind of started to see their personality. It was like, oh, they really don't know what they're doing. They don't even know where their next meal is coming from.
Yeah.
They're depending on me to try to finance whatever this weird little road trip is.
And the guilt that you'd have to feel from leaving your family like that. Yeah.
So this is probably where they run afoul the most, but this is almost like the biggest boon for them. Because as Sharon Morgan comes back, her husband's like, they asked you to do what? Pay for shit with your credit card? No. Credit card fraud. We're going to call this in for credit card fraud. So they end up pulling over Marshall and Bonnie and arrest him on this credit card fraud charge. Well, it turns out that they end up finding out that he has this warrant for his arrest back in Missouri for stealing the car. Marshall's explanation for stealing the car was, God told me I could do it.
It was a rental car.
Yeah.
So it wasn't Sharon's car. So they had rented a car, I think, with her credit card.
But they were...
And then he had refused to actually return the car.
Yeah, they were arrested initially for the credit card fraud, and then that brought up the warrant from stealing the rental car.
And during this time that they're also traveling, basically what they're doing is they're trying to develop what their recognized and kind of projected belief system is going to be. So you have Applewhite, who is reading all of this, science fiction, stuff like that. He's also reading some religious stuff. Bonnie has her thought process. And I feel like at this point, they're kind of trying to figure out the angle. Like, how do we approach this? So she's taking her astrology angle and the occult and all that kind of stuff. He's taking all of the maybe Christianity, Presbyterian stuff, and they're merging it into this hodgepodge amalgamation of what will be a religious UFO type theology.
They just went at it without a plan. There wasn't a cohesive story that they could use to basically try to get both of their points across.
Well, they did end up finding kind of a tie-in, because you have to have a tie-in to recognize religion. Mm-hmm. So their tie-in was going to be that the two witnesses that are listed, I think, in the book of Revelations, the ones that are killed as martyrs, that they were those two beings.
Yeah, it's so the easiest way to talk about it was she starts putting out these teachings basically saying that Jesus Christ was reincarnated in Texas. He was reincarnated into this 6'1" tall, pale man in Texas, this Texan, and kind of trying to allude that Jesus Christ was Marshall Applewhite, which I don't really know how you get to that point, but that's just their plan. They looked at themselves as these two witnesses that you talked about that were in the book of Revelation. They were killed. They were restored to life. There's a lot of crazy biblical stuff about how they were killed and their bodies were left in the streets for a number of days. They were brought back in. They were restored. They also throw a little bit in, I believe, right around this time about how Jesus' resurrection coincided with him bringing his body back onto the alien spacecraft that came and picked him up. So he didn't ascend to heaven.
The next level.
Excuse me. Yes, the next level. But they were the ones that had witnessed this transport that had happened and witnessed all of these things in the book of Revelation. If you ever meet somebody that's very religious and they focus a lot on the book of Revelation, it's a red flag. It's a bad sign. It's not going to look good. And it's so doom and gloom that you have to know that that's where the apocalypse mind goes.
It's like
to
the
Revelation.
fire and brimstone shit,
yes.
Isn't that okay? That's
and it was written with no forethought. It was written by people that just wanted to create the scariest thing that they could to try to make people believe that
to scare the fuck out of you into being good.
Believe in the other 9/10 of it beforehand.
Yeah. So Applewhite ends up getting arrested in Texas, jailed in St. Louis for 6 months. So he uses his time.
Yeah. In the two witnesses, the belief that they would then be restored to life and then transported via spaceship, as a la JC was, they called this the demonstration.
Okay.
So yeah, 6 months in prison.
He takes his time to basically, he's like the editor. She has the ideas. He's mixing in his ideas, making suggestions. And then he's sitting there and he's tooling it and retooling it and refining it and finding the holes in it and shoring those up. And basically they're like, okay, what we're going to do is we don't feel like the occult aspect of it is really selling. People aren't biting on that too much. So we're really going to kind of lean into the UFO aspect of it because there's not a lot out there that's maybe leaning into that. This isn't their methodology. They actually might believe in this shit, or at least Applewhite does. But
this is what a logical mind would do.
Correct. But at the same time, you can tell that they're able to drop an aspect out of it and put another one. So you have to be like, how much of it was belief with a combination of like, but what do we have to tell people to make them believe this kind of stuff? So he ends up getting out.
Oh, we got way more here.
Okay.
Way more to these beliefs. So like you said, they cut out all the goofy occult shit in favor for extraterrestrials and this kind of evolutionary theory. This UFO religion relies on the thought of ancient astronauts.
I love the ancient astronaut hypothesis.
Yep.
Here's the thing. I don't believe it, but to me, it would make so much sense if it was true.
So if you believe in aliens, that's the only leap that you have to take for it to be just as logical as everything else. Like the whole creation story is just as logical as aliens planting these seeds if you believe in aliens like you believe in God.
So essentially the Cliff Notes version for the ancient astronaut theory is that aliens have actually been influencing and in contact and to Earth before. They had a hand in essentially, building the pyramids, the Easter Island stuff. It was things that basically you could point to and say, there's not really an answer for how humans were able to do that. So they believe that there has been some influence and kind of guiding of aliens, basically.
Yeah, they planted these seeds of current humanity millions of years ago, and then they're to come back and reap the harvest from all of these spiritually evolved individuals that are supposed to happen. A major belief was that there were always going to be sacrifices that were going to be required to help escape this human suffering. So you were going to have to make earthly sacrifices to be able to avoid when the earth goes under. They believed that they were genderless, sexless, kind of androgynous beings, and we'll talk about that a little later on with how they dress and cut their hair and just a lot of the stuff that they do. But he's retooled this enough to where it's almost like, I wouldn't say the word scientific just because we're still talking about aliens, but evolutionary stuff. There's going to be scientific terms that he used that are more widely understood than occult terms.
He's mixing anything and everything
together.
Yeah.
At the same time, he's also trying to cut out like a lot of the, I want to say euphemisms, but like he's getting more realistic with what he's saying.
Okay.
Instead of metaphorical.
Okay, gotcha.
So the metaphors are they're giving way to just more literal meanings in the senses of what he's saying. So yeah, he ends up getting released, and they set out with this new strategy. I don't know if he boosted another car to get him out of the city.
No, I'm pretty sure that she was probably there to pick him up.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they were in communication to some degree. I'm not sure to what capacity or anything like that, if they're writing letters back and forth. And so, of course, they're sharing this information. Fuck, I can only imagine being the guy that maybe has to review all of the mail coming in and reading their letters and just being like, what the fuck is this? But yeah, I mean, even some of their ideas leaning into, like you said, into that UFO aspect of it or alien aspect of it, of these higher evolutionary beings that, are going up to the next level. Part of that was transcending essentially like the human condition or the human weaknesses, basically like genderless, sexless, androgynous beings. So part of that also kind of develops in the way they would be approaching once they did start to gain more followers, even a kind of like visual guidelines that they would have.
Haircuts. Their new strategy, I think, is sort of where they separate themselves from other cults. They would advertise their meetings using these flyers. In the flyers, they wouldn't be alien, extraterrestrial forward. It would just be very vanilla, just basic stuff. In these meetings, they weren't pushy. They wouldn't last a very long time. It would literally just be them going up, talking about how they're performing this experiment that they've gotten from this next level to where they're from. just a basic Cliff Notes version. And then if you have any questions, we have these resources. Go ahead and reach out to us. And it's almost like they just sent out a mass cold call, and then we're just waiting for somebody to call them back.
They would go out sometimes and literally just stand there for like a minute or a couple minutes before even beginning. So it was probably pretty fucking weird. But yeah, they definitely avoided having any discussions with potential people in person.
Smart,
exactly. And I think they also knew that it was probably a better use of their time to just hand out, be like, call us if you have any, because then they could take and field calls that entire time. But also trying to explain something to someone and sell this kind of stuff over the phone is probably a little bit easier to do than doing it when Applewhite's just staring at you with those big eyes trying to answer your questions about fucking aliens.
Well, and I think the biggest part of it is it easier to convince somebody that you sought out or that sought out you after?
Yeah, and that's the thing is by calling them, they knew that those people had gone, thought about it for a little bit, and were still interested in it.
Yeah, and we're talking about a time when we're just coming out of the hippie 60s Haight and Ashbury, this new wave of kind of religions, these new age religions, to where people were a little bit more open to this stuff because everything was a little bit more fluid in the terms of thought. Also at this point in time, this whole idea was if they did get a call back, those were going to be the people that would be brought up on this voyage to the next level. Right around this time, for some reason, don't know why, these people were the goddamn worst at naming. They went by guinea and pig for the experimental aspect of what they were doing to bring people to this higher level.
Yeah, there was a habit of kind of being known by these different names at different periods of time. So guinea and pig was one of them.
We'll get to...
Okay.
I got a timeline of the names.
Okay.
But also at the same time, if you don't put a name to this, it changes your level of paranoia, because if they don't know that you're Marshall Applewhite, if they don't know that you're Bonnie Nettles, if they just know you by guinea and pig, there's going to be no way to be able to draw back any information about these people. And if you're trying to sell yourself as an alien being that just showed up to this planet, you probably don't want a backstory.
I think that it probably wasn't the best tactic, because even if you're kind of like thinking maybe there's some legitimacy to this, as soon as they say, hi, I'm guinea and I'm pig, you're like, nope, you fucking lost me. I think that was probably a poor choice on their part. Did you also hear what their name was initially before it was Heaven's Gate?
Well, this first one that we're about to talk about, when they named themselves the Human Individual Metamorphosis Organization.
Before that. The Anonymous Sexaholic Celibate Church.
Oh, that was how they were bringing people in for like meetings, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So they were just preying on sexaholics.
Yeah.
I'm sure that certainly wasn't Applewhite's plan. I'm sure that certainly wasn't his idea. He wasn't banging Bonnie. He needed something. Maybe get a few sexaholics on the rolls. You never know.
That seems to be a common thing throughout cults, is having that type of control, but I can see it both ways, because he does take some pretty drastic steps to ensure he can't do shit like that. So I wonder if this was something that he felt like the only way to remove the temptation for himself was doing that, and if he had like a checkered history of things before.
We talked about it earlier, though. It's the push and pull of his sexuality. It's when things are going good, he tends to slip up, and then he falls back into it.
Yeah.
Things are going very, very good now, so I'm sure he's concerned about slipping back into his ways, and then when he starts getting these feelings, he knows what's going on. So this Human Individual Metamorphosis Organization actually starts gaining some traction.
Or him.
Yeah, that's right. Not the, what was it, the Danish metal band that Bam Margera was into?
Yeah.
Back in the day, him. They would make trips into California that would yield some pretty good results. Shocking that California is where this is starting to take place, just back in the 70s.
Which is crazy, because isn't this at the same time that Jonestown is actually happening, or has Jonestown already headed off for? I'm going to look that up to see if they've already headed for South America yet.
If this was 75, this would be like 7-ish years after Manson. I don't think we have Jonestown yet. I think that was somewhere around there. You'll get it. They did these speaking engagements that would target college campuses. So again, young, impressionable people, college kids out there that may be out on their own for the first time, experiencing the world, and then you run into Guinea and Pig, and they start talking about how God was an alien. You're probably going to get a little bit of pull with these kids just because it's something that they didn't realize existed, which it doesn't, but it sounds good. About 50 members would end up being the haul for these trips into California, which again, 50 members is a shitload. That's a lot of people that they're getting just on these trips because they didn't have a lot before. So anything's good.
So 68, the People's Temple was admitted to the Disciples of Christ in California, their California location.
Okay, so they followed a little bit after that projector. When did Jonestown happen?
Oh, I'll look that up.
Okay. In September 1975.
78.
78.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean...
yeah.
But at the same time, at this point in time, they're not talking about suicide.
Yes.
This isn't even a thought in their mind. Their ideologies and their beliefs are somewhere completely different.
Well, I mean, and to be honest, that really wasn't in the cards early on for Jonestown either. That was a move made out of complete desperation by a fucking lunatic.
True. Very true. September 1975, they're just major like all in one. They make this happen. There's a meeting that they have in this Oregon town. I forgot what the name it was.
Waldport, baby.
Waldport?
Yeah.
God, it doesn't sound like a town of... Sorry for from Waldport when I say this. Doesn't sound like a town of rocket scientists. I think there was about 1,000 people in this town. They end up walking away with more than 30 people, which the whole town's not there. So if you have 100 people that show up...
That's an insane percentage out of that. We were talking about this a little bit before the show, and man, you hear these people come and give this message. What was life in Waldport like? Like, what were your prospects in Waldport? Like, you had to check your family tree, so you had to ensure you weren't fucking like a cousin just from a couple generations back or anything.
Second cousin. I'm sure first cousins were on the table.
That's true. But then all of a sudden, you see this opportunity to maybe kind of get out of that area, even if the message is a little bit batshit crazy. You're like, hey, you know what? I'm young. Let's fucking give it a go. Why not? And so, yeah, 30 people out of a town of 1,000 leave. And when that ends up happening... everybody knows everybody. Yeah. I come from a town of 7,000 people, and I can assure you, everybody knows everybody's business within at least a week. You lose 30 people out of 1,000, that's going to be crazy because, again, this is in the 70s. Lines of communication were your fucking landline and payphones. And so if you just up and disappear, and the way they would kind of do these little recruitment spots is they would normally not hang out any place for more than like 6 days. They were actually trying to stay off the radar, kind of stay off the grid from the man, and would basically just be traveling around and come give these speeches, and then would wait around for like 5 or 6 more days to be able to allow people to pretty much get all their shit taken care of.
Yeah.
And then follow them. Because in one instance, some guy sold his house within 5 days to go ahead and go with him. People were leaving.
It was for like $50.
And people were leaving jobs and all that kind of shit. So they were like, hey, we'll show up on a Tuesday, have all your affairs in order because we're heading out the door on Friday. And then no way to communicate with these people that are leaving. So you're almost getting into a situation where this group of people, these 2 people show up, or maybe they had a couple more people with them at that point. And all of a sudden, after that, a week later, 30 people are gone. You're going to look at that and be like, what the fuck happened?
It's in San Francisco. You lose 30 people in San Francisco. Not very many people find out about it. 30 people leave town. I'm sure anytime somebody left the town of Waldorf, everybody knew about it. Like that was a big thing. They probably had a sending off ceremony. I don't know. But still, 30 people missing from that populace is huge. And it started to gain this national attention that Applewhite didn't like, because when you're taking people away from their family and they think that they're going missing, you're probably going to get looked at a little bit different. But the way that Applewhite saw it was that he was seeking people that were devoted over using these brainwashing tactics that he was being accused of, which he's going to say it's not brainwashing. I will agree that it's not a traditional brainwashing, but at the same time, in a roundabout way, it's totally brainwashing. But
it's a behavioral reconditioning, Adam.
Yeah, okay. But at the same time...
That's just the nice way to say brainwash.
At the same time, it's... if they have the illusion of choice to be able to make these choices, it's tough to call it brainwashing.
Which is crazy because even saying that, it's still dicey saying the illusion of choice, because there is still a lot of choice in there throughout the whole course of this thing. There is nothing but choice, which is why it's so fucking fascinating that these people hung around, especially when stuff starts to get even crazier.
Well, and in a sense, too, you can look at it as a little bit of a Pavlovian response, because while you are given choices, the choices that you're given come with a little speech and a little sermon saying things like, well, you can do this if you want. I wouldn't necessarily make that choice. And if we're going to talk about pleasing guinea and pig, you would probably make this choice, but it's totally your choice.
It was flipping it around. The fault was being flipped around to where it was like, oh, no. You're not leaving because of anything that we're doing. You're leaving because you're not able to do these things that we're asking you to do, which all these other people here are doing. So if anything, it's not us that are asking you to leave. You're leaving on your own. But hey, come back. Like, if you want to, yeah, no hard feelings. We'll actually give you bus fare and everything, but you're always welcome back here.
You're never the bad guy. So whenever you get tasked with these choices that you have to make, the bell rings, you start salivating when you hear the one that's going to be the best choice for everybody.
You also are just waiting for somebody's life to get worse than they felt that it was with the group or with Heaven's Gate. Because when that happened and that person was like, and they have to reminisce about being with you because that was a better time, that's the person that's going to turn around and know that they can come back without any judgment.
And this whole idea that they're pushing through these devoted peoples is that there is salvation through individual growth and personal choice. He uses this goofy-ass metaphor that he doesn't almost immediately go back on, but eventually goes back on about a caterpillar who runs into its metamorphosis, and once it leaves its chrysalis, it is sitting on a rose with this king butterfly. Just a bunch of goofy shit, but he's using like terms that people would understand, that caterpillars turn into butterflies. There's a metamorphosis into this other species or whatever. And it's just a way of basically trying to push evolutionary thought over crazy occult religious stuff.
You're using the comparison of taking something some people might find undesirable or ugly and turning it into something beautiful and trying to get people to believe that that's what being with them is going to allow them the possibility of doing. That will be the end result of their work to do this.
Yeah, personally, I'd rather hang out with that caterpillar that smokes the pipe in Alice in Wonderland. That guy seems pretty sweet.
Oh, yeah. So around this time, they do start going by another set of nicknames, Doe and T.
Now, no, this is Bo and Peep first.
This is still Bo and Peep?
No, we transformed from Guinea and Pig. Now this is Bo and Peep at the end of 1975. They had about 70 followers, and they believed that was their flock.
Okay, so Bo and Peep have their sheep.
Is that... I'm not sure how the nursery rhyme goes. I thought Bo Peep was the lady that was watching the sheep.
She was, but that's what... I heard that analogy. Bo and Peep had their sheep. They had their followers.
Yeah.
Around this time, this is where they develop, and they're kind of leaving a lot of these ideas open-ended enough to where they can plug in these little details. They can fill in gaps between the lines. So one of the things they come out with is basically that, I can't remember who was Bo and who was Peep. I can remember Doe and T.
Bo was Marshall.
Applewhite. Okay. When they eventually do start going by Doe and T, they come out and they're basically like, okay, Marshall's vehicle, and that's what they refer to as your body. Your body is your vehicle. Essentially, your whatever they refer to it as the spirit. I had a hard time. I couldn't find what they actually considered the driver to be, but you have your vehicle, which is just basically your meat suit. And your vehicle can actually be filled with a different spirit. So Doe, which is Applewhite, his vehicle is being driven by none other than the big man, Jesus Christ himself. And actually, T, which is Bonnie's actually the father. Bonnie is actually God. She's the one that is teaching Marshall. So she's actually, already recognized at this point as kind of the one in charge.
Well, and as you'll notice throughout this entire narrative, we've talked a whole hell of a lot more about Marshall than we have about Bonnie. Mm-hmm. But Bonnie is God.
Yeah.
That seems very interesting to me. And it's odd that they go back to that, because prior to, as Bo and Peep, they start using more scientific words such as biology and chemistry to kind of start legitimizing it. And they looked at more of religion as inferior to science, where they're going to walk away from the Bible enough to where they can kind of push their own narratives, because they have to try to figure out how to do something that the Bible doesn't do. Mm-hmm. You have to try to start separating all these earthly desires to... It's like giving that away is your prerequisite for ascension. Mm-hmm. So you have to start disassociating with any of that. You have to renounce your family, your friends, media, drugs, alcohol, jewelry, facial hair, sexuality. You have to adopt new names.
In order to get to the next level, it's like building a character, except your character has a bunch of fucking like negative traits or curses on them. And in order to get to this next level, you have to find ways of getting rid of all these negative aspects and ties that are tying your fucking meat suit, your vehicle, all of those ties that you have as a human, you have to sever and be without before you're able to be capable of ascending to the next level.
Well, I might be wrong in saying this, but I feel like separating yourself from earthly desires feels very Buddhist.
Yeah. I mean, they're borrowing from a lot of different stuff.
Yeah.
So to also provide a little bit more of a deeper explanation, at this point, Marshall and Bonnie are actually already at the next level. They came back. So they've come back, and did they explain that they had come back multiple times in the past, or whenever certain groups of people were ready or something like that? But in this point, this is what they were kind of possessing at this point. They had already been to the next level. Their job was to come down and gather up all the other people who had been essentially spirits inside vehicles 2,000 years ago when Jesus was initially around.
They were the ancient astronauts.
Correct. Gather up those people because it was time, the mothership was calling and it was time to go home. He was just basically, they couldn't remember. The whole story was they couldn't remember how to actually get to that next level. And so they were coaching all of these people in order to do so.
Well, yeah, during those times, they were fairly what they would call like a quasi-nomadic. As Chris said, 6 days they were in and out. Their lifestyle suited them without any jobs or any ties to places.
Which is crazy because, like, at this point, they have between 70 and 100 followers, and they're just going around. And when people would leave and decide to come with them, they would always tell them to bring any camping equipment that they have. Always bring your camping equipment because we're going to be doing a lot of that shit.
Yeah, that's the thing is, unless you already have a bus or some sort of infrastructure, how do you travel with that many people?
Do you realize that there is an entire generation of people who shared campgrounds with Heaven's Gate, who were kids when they came in and remember in their memories oh shit, I remember all these people poured in and there was 100 of them. And they were actually all listening to this old lady and this guy. And it was actually really fucking weird. I heard them talking about aliens.
Yeah, I don't know if they were quite that forward facing though, is the only thing.
No, I'm not saying forward facing. But once all this came out, once information about Heaven's Gate came out, 97 when all the shit goes down and they're really, on the front page, people had to look back and being where do I know that name from? Heaven. Be oh shit, do you remember when we were camping that one time and we heard those people talking about Heaven's Gate? They're on the news right now. That would be something that would jog your memory because I imagine them coming into a campsite would be something that would be pretty memorable.
I don't think they ever really traveled in the solid pack, though. I think they had broken up to where, because we'll get on a little bit later about talking them moving into houses.
Yeah.
They would move in these groups and not necessarily associate with each other. So if they're sitting at a campground, yeah, they're all going to look the same. But if they're not doing their teachings openly frontward facing stuff, you'll probably remember seeing them roll into camp. But there's probably pretty unspectacular. You're going to have to put the pieces together to realize that's who it was.
Definitely. But what I'm saying is there is a large, not a large group of people, but there is a substantial group of people who ran into these people during the formative years who probably saw it come out years later and were just holy shit. That's who, do you remember that? That's all the people that were dressed the same. Kind of like what you were saying, how they would always, or they would kind of break up into these little cells or what they call them. Star clusters. You would still want to roll with a sizable group because if you break up too much, this is where we run into the instance of, and we got to talk about, do you have that down, or can we talk about the whole going to reporters to try to track them down?
Oh, yeah, I did. It was just something that I had read.
Okay. So you eventually do have, at certain points, groups getting separated from each other. And because there was never really a planned route of where and when they were going to be at these places, you wouldn't be able to locate them. And so there were instances where these little star clusters, which I imagine they had to be like 5, 6, 7 people.
Yeah, probably most.
Would be rolling into town and walking into these newspapers and finding reporters and being like, hey, so we're part of Heaven's Gate, which is a collective based upon improving ourselves in order to go into space and reach a new planet. We're trying to find our mothership. Are you able to send out like any type of like article or write an article about us that they can maybe then see, and then they can contact you and tell them where they are, and then you can tell us where they are, and then we can find them again.
Yeah.
How do you even approach that?
Who are the names of the people you're trying to get in contact with? Bo and Peep.
Hold on, it's Doe and T. No, is it Guinea and Pig? It's Jesus and God, essentially, is who we're trying to get a hold of. Are you gonna? You're not writing this stuff down.
Yeah, all it was for them to hopefully be able to have somebody in another star cluster or the next level ascendants themselves, Bo and Peep, to be able to see that and be like, oh, we got to go get these people.
Do you think any of those reporters actually ran any story on it?
Yeah, I bet they did.
So there's news articles that you could probably go back
sure.
in these small papers and be like, oh shit.
Because what else is going on that's not going to get your attention?
Telling you right now, if that happened in my hometown, that's definitely making, if not page 1, at least page 2 news.
Gotta be, yeah, for sure. There were stories about people who had joined Heaven's Gate that never actually met Marshall or Bonnie because they were forced into these clusters as they were leaving towns. It could have been a month or 2 before they had a chance to meet back up. And so in that month, you have a chance to realize you're like, oh, well, I'm not even a part of this group enough to meet the 2 leaders.
I kind of thought about that too. Like, you have these little star clusters that are broken up. It sounds so fucking weird saying that. And I would imagine that they would individually be able to maybe draw a follower every now and then and being like, oh, hey, like, what do you want to hear about this? And all of a sudden one person is just like, yeah, man, let's fucking do it. I'll travel with you guys. That person could be considered a member of Heaven's Gate, at least for a limited time. But I could definitely see how not meeting, Bonnie and Marshall would definitely be a possibility.
Well, this whole thing too, to really think about it, we haven't brought up numbers yet because the numbers are so fluid. There's estimates that they could have had 1,000 members at one time. I don't buy those estimates.
I think maybe over the entire course, the 22 years, I think they could have had 1,000 people come in and out the door. Some people could have done the fucking Grandpa Simpson where they walked in, put down their hat, turned right around, picked back up their hat, and left. But they might have, at least stayed around for a seminar or a class. What was it? Classroom?
Coffee. Huh? Yeah.
It was classroom.
Coffee in the classroom.
Yeah.
Which, again, I personally think that even 4 digits is a little bit gracious, but I also don't have a whole lot of faith in these people because they weren't really good cult leaders. Any good cult leader, tough phrase to say, any good cult leader is always going to keep your eye on everybody because you know that every single one of these people that believes everything that you say is necessary to your ego to keep it going, and potentially somebody that could go out and leak whatever you're doing that's nefarious.
There were times I think they panicked when numbers started to dwindle and everything, but I think overall, as long as there was a few people in there to listen to them and were believing in this message, I almost feel like that was enough for them. I don't feel like they were ever a numbers game or anything like that, because there came a time when they got some heat on them and they just stopped fucking recruiting and kind of disappeared for a while. But I think it was more important to them to make sure that, and that's why they let people go if they decided their heart wasn't in it. They were just like, yeah, by all means go. Like, we think you probably should if your heart's not completing this. They wanted the people there that were essentially going to do without question what they asked them to do, so they wouldn't have to be alone in this fucking crazy journey that they were planning on going on.
Well, and a big part of it for me, that when I look at this, they pitched this whole idea of them being the two witnesses, right?
Yeah.
That they were supposed to be martyred and then they were supposed to be brought back to life.
Mm-hmm.
But anytime they got any heat on them, their paranoia made them go hide.
Yeah.
So if you really truly believe that you have to be martyred to be resurrected to fulfill this prophecy, you're probably not going to hide from the people that may potentially martyr you, right?
I see the justification on that of them being like, well, you guys aren't ready yet. If we're gone and we just put ourselves out there, how are you guys supposed to get to the next level?
Yeah, well, they did use, I know we're getting close to a bathroom break. I'm feeling it too. But just before we get into that, this assassination narrative, this two witnesses narrative, was pushed forth by justifying that Marshall's treatment in the media and the prison sentence that he had already fulfilled, or that he had already been sentenced to, had fulfilled the prophecy. That was enough of an assassination, quote unquote, that then we could move on with this big reveal.
Because it's like the oh my God, the apocalyptic checklist. You have to hit this step in order to get to the next one. They're like, fuck, we're stuck on this goddamn step. They're like, what's happened to you? They're like, I was arrested for, with a rental car. That's an assassination of character, isn't
exactly.
it? Okay, fuck it. It counts. Check the box onto the next one.
We made that step so shallow that it would just be impossible not to overcome. Okay, you ready for a bathroom break?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
Well, hey there, all you sexy historians. How you guys doing?
It is time for
socials.
Where can they find us on Instagram?
If they want to follow us, they can find us at Historically High Pod on Instagram.
That goes the same for Threads as well. You can also find us on Twitter.
Tell them about Twitter.
Historically High. That's Historically HI on Twitter.
And if you want to email any of your comments or suggestions, where can they find us at, Adam?
At Historically High Podcast at gmail.com.
Gmail. All right, and back to the show. All right, and now we come to 1776. Things are going to change quickly with a few breaks in between.
Yeah, and it's kind of wild that we're going to talk about these big home run swings, because usually as a cult leader, the last thing that you want to do if you're trying to reinforce that you never lie is to make a big promise, to make a big grand promise.
Not only that, to make the promise.
Yeah.
For this group. That's you don't want to blow your wad. And that's why I think part of it is why I think that they really didn't believe. No one believes it's a cult, I guess. But their main premise was trying to actually like do this thing instead of keeping it together. They had to have known that it wasn't going to show up. So to keep doing that, like, you're just trying to lose followers at that point.
Well, and that's where I think the whole idea of the suicide, because it comes up much, much later than this.
Yeah.
But the same reason that Jim Jones did the test with the Kool-Aid. It's like a test of faith.
Yeah.
And that's what this kind of was. In 76, we get the official name change. They put it on their birth certificates or got the paperwork for Do and T on the voice scale. Do, re, mi, so.
It was from The Sound of Music.
Okay.
The hills are like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do.
Yeah, I thought that was, which is crazy. Ti, do. The two tops, right? But it's Ti, do, and he was Do and she was Ti, but she was God.
But also, fa, sol, la, ti. Oh, shit. How does it go? Do. Oh, do is at the bottom, too. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do.
Okay. I'm out on music.
You're making
stuff.
me think about this too much.
Okay. They gathered all of their followers, all their remaining followers, everybody that they could get a hold of and had some sort of an address for, or saw an ad in a newspaper. They gathered them all in Medicine Bow National Forest in southeast Wyoming because there's a UFO coming. They're coming to visit. You're going to get to see the next level show up in kind to give you visual proof on what these two goofs have been telling you about for the last few years.
Oh, okay. That's what it was. It wasn't to take them.
No.
They weren't like, hey, you've all graduated, which is actual terminology. That's what they referred to it as, was graduation, was reaching that next level. I thought that's what it was, is they were, okay.
They had multiple instances after that, but this first one was just a proof of concept, basically.
Gotcha. Okay.
Which, again, I guess...
You guys want to hear it from the mothership? Fine. We'll make the mothership come down here and tell you.
Yeah, and maybe there is some sort of justification for being like, you're allowed to see them, but you haven't graduated yet to go with them. Like, you still haven't done your work on Earth to disconnect.
There's so many ways to look at this. The angle of it is like, did they know they were wrong? Did they really believe it? Were they using this, like you said, as a test to make sure like it was just the fucking ride or dies that were going to be there?
Well, and it's wild to say because you and I are having a discussion about our thought process behind a cult. Like, that's not a normal thing to be like, well, they probably did it for this reason or that reason. Like, you're almost kind of putting like, what would you do?
That's part of why it's so fascinating to me is you are trying to piece together, you're Charlie Kelling this thing in the mailroom where you're trying to get like, what could have possessed them to think of this, or why would someone believe this? How did they tie this in?
Trying to understand the human mind.
There needs to be a fucking board game, like a cult-related board game that's just like every player gets to design a certain type of cult and other players have to try to tear it down.
Yeah, unfortunately, people would take that a step further.
Hasbro, get on it.
So this grand showing is supposed to happen. Before it happens, Doe and T come to them and tell them the visit has been canceled. That's why they're not going to show up tomorrow night. They don't show up tomorrow night. There were very few people that walked away at this point. It was like their sunk costs were in, and at the same time, they saw how sad Doe and T were, Marshall and Bonnie were, about this not happening, that instead of immediately going to anger, they went into support mode.
Okay, that's fucking genius. Because had they gone through and it didn't show up, they would all be looking at them being like, what the fuck? But the fact they came and at least gave them some bit of information is like, yeah, bad news, communique from the rocket ship. Captain Spock says he's not going to be able to make it tomorrow. So, and I'm making Star Trek references because, surprise, surprise, one of the few shows that they were allowed to watch was actually Star Trek. And they even designed some uniforms that were kind of Star Trek-ish.
Heaven's Gate away team on the patches.
But yeah, to basically have that out of saying, we're so sorry. Like, we knew how much this meant to everybody. It meant a lot to us, but they just said they had to cancel. Then by flipping, again, that's flipping it around to make it look like they're also one of the victims, and that, you know, instead of being upset at us, you should, you know, empathize with us.
Pretty smart. It's tough to say pretty smart, but it's pretty brilliant move. One of the other ways that they fostered honesty was they kept follower bonding down. So in these clusters that they would put people into, these star clusters, they would look at their personalities and put them together with other people that they wouldn't necessarily mesh with.
It's the body system. Buddy!
Buddy, you got to hope that your buddy can save you. In this instance, they don't want that reliability to save each other.
No, it was an accountability buddy is what it was.
And that's truly what they would be, because within these star clusters, they would even break them down into, as Chris says, I forgot the actual word for it, honesty partner or something like that, but they were just an accountability buddy. If you felt guilty about doing something, if you broke a rule, one of these 17 tenets that we'll talk about here in a second that are just these wild questions that are totally loaded.
Are you wearing a fucking pinky ring?
Yeah, I'm trying something out.
Okay.
What do you think?
I don't know how. I'm not saying no.
Does it not look natural?
It's just I just looked down and I saw that and it kind of caught me off guard. But I don't hate it.
I don't hate it either. That's why I'm trying it. I like it.
Yeah, let's maybe make this more of a little bit of a long. Let's try it next week too, and we'll see how I feel then.
Reassess.
Okay.
Yeah, I felt like maybe a little cult leader-ish, throws a pinky ring on. Everything kind of changes about the way you feel about that guy.
I'm sold. You sold me on it.
Less Ron Jeremy, but
there you go.
Something along those lines. No rape. But these accountability buddies basically were, if you felt like you had done something, you felt an immoral act, the worldly sins got to you somehow, you would then report this to who you were accountable to. You would have a conversation about it. It would be out in the open. But then you get a little Scientology to it, because whoever you were accountable with would then go tell Doe and T what was going on.
I also think there was an aspect of, like, wasn't there some turning in aspect on it? Like,
yeah,
if
there was some snitching.
Like they do something, they don't come to you, you come to us and tell us.
We forgot to mention the best part about the aliens. God damn it.
What?
The Luciferians.
Oh, that's right.
So, because every good needs an evil, everybody needs an enemy.
And you have to make sure it's tied enough in. It's got a little bit of name recognition, so it drives the point home.
Yeah, you got to call the devil spirits, the devil aliens, the Luciferians. The belief in this whole ancient astronaut stuff was that the Luciferians were the ones that were guiding all of the other religions. They were guiding government. Anything that was going against them was driven by the Luciferians to try to
people.
to tear them. Yeah, that's what it was. This is like the first iteration of the lizard people.
It's the Illuminati.
Very much so.
Kind of like the Illuminati.
And so all of these...
This thing has everything.
Yeah. All of these temptresses, if you're out buying groceries, if you're out, you see some hot chick walk by camp, the Luciferians placed her there to try to tempt you with these worldly desires that you once had that you're trying to beat so you can ascend. These accountability partners...
This is like Battlestar Galactica, where they have the Cylons, where they actually look like human. They're in like Terminator infiltration units. They're just like, stay away from those.
I was with you with a little Star Trek. Battlestar Galactica is a galaxy too far for me.
I just know that aspect of it.
Okay, all right. Hey, open space here. You can admit whatever you want. If you're a Galacticon, that's cool too. Fuck.
Did I get you off the rails with...
A little bit. I think we can get her back on, though. These accountability partners, if you're in star clusters with people that don't necessarily tend to mesh and like have empathy for each other or anything like that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's essentially the ideal scenario, because you also, there were like a husband and wife that were actually in here that had to essentially renounce being husband and wife, that were then set up, or some of them came in with the expectation of being accountability buddies with their spouse or their former spouse, and they're like, no, we need to remember the whole no sex thing.
Not even in the same star clusters.
Yeah, exactly. And so you were basically, it would be like putting like early season Office, Jim and Dwight together.
Yeah, and then making them accountable for each other's actions.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
At this point in time, there was no physical touch. There was no hugs. There was no pats on the shoulder. There was no fist bumps. There certainly wasn't any butt bumps. It just, the 70s, disco was not a part of their time in the 70s.
Part of the push of this was that they were going to be so focused and so busy with their own self-improvement, because no one else was going to get you to the next level. Any type of interaction with anybody else was just going to be time taken away from your own improvement to get to the next level. And so it kind of fostered this environment where people really didn't interact with each other. It was all about each individual person, even though they were broken up into these clusters. They were broken up in here just to basically for kind of the logistics of it, to be able to kind of have people living in certain areas. But your accountability buddy wasn't like, hey, we're hanging out all the time. It was someone basically looking over your shoulder and that you were supposed to report to, and vice versa. Other than that, it was a lot of kind of like self-imposed seclusion, just based on kind of the structure of how this whole thing was run.
Well, at this point in time in the late 70s, they kind of tried to disappear into campgrounds. They got the negative press in Oregon. The pressure is kind of on, like you were talking about. They stopped trying to recruit and they kind of went into seclusion. But as they went into seclusion, these demands of this kind of everyday life that they had to live were more structured within these clusters. And that increased demand that was being put on them is kind of where their obedience grows, because if Doe or T needs you to go do something, you're expected to do it immediately. If you have a role to play within your cluster, you have to play that role because you can't let everybody else down.
Yeah, you had to give up your stuff. You didn't have like individual money or anything like that. If you went out and earned money, it was all put back into the collective. And so you're basically in a position where if you were to leave this, and you weren't sure that your family would take you back, or that you even had family to go back to, you were leaving with nothing. Everything was relied upon, Heaven's Gate for your shelter, your food, your water. Basically, all of your necessities were tied to this thing.
Which is very cultish. That's very typical within a cult. And as you were just talking about, kind of that seclusion starts to bring them closer to their leaders because that's the only thing that's there.
There are so many ways that cults go about this isolation or seclusion type thing, that it's the actual physical isolation, Jonestown, taking people out to the middle of the jungle. And that's in combination with the financial and economic seclusion, basically making them reliant on you. Jonestown did them both. They're just doing kind of one of them. So while not as successful, it's still keeping enough people around.
Yeah. And luckily, somehow they strike it big. I don't know where this influx of cash comes from. I think they said kind of the most logical thought was that it was an inheritance that one of the students had gotten.
Yeah. So one of the members of Heaven's Gate got like a $300,000 to $400,000 inheritance, and because they didn't have their own possessions, that inheritance, of course, went to them, but then it was turned over to Heaven's Gate. So they were living large for a little bit.
Yeah, and they used the money to start to rent houses to get out of these campgrounds. They were in Denver at this time, and they had around 40 followers, so not a whole ton. But what they would do to try to not arouse suspicion would be they would all kind of move in the dead of night, and then you would only have like 2 or 3 people leaving the house at a time. There'd be like 10 people in a house.
Well, I think how I heard it was you basically had assigned day walkers. So there were 3 to 4 people
Red hair?
that were allowed to,
Red hair?
No, like Blade.
Okay.
There were 3 or 4 people that were allowed to leave. I heard it was the same 3 to 4 people because your neighbors would notice if there were, how many times would, you would notice if it was a different person leaving the house.
Oh, yeah.
So there was only 3 or 4 people, enough to put up, a reasonable, not like,
plausible deniability.
Like, oh, well, it's a 3 or 4 bedroom house. I see, 2 of them might be a couple or something like that. So the other people weren't allowed to leave. So it was always maintaining that front of it was just the same 3 to 4 people coming and going, and they would handle everything out. Other than that, these other people would have to actually stay within like the confines of the home or the compound.
So bad. This would be a good time to talk about the names, the naming. Mm-hmm. I know you enjoyed that part of it. In order to shed all your earthly possessions, you have to shed your earthly name, right?
Yes, of course.
So instead of giving them the illusion of choice and letting them pick their own names and hoping that they do it the right way, they just seem to simplify this.
They met him halfway, the way I see it. They're like, okay, so here's the deal. You can have a name. You get to make up your own name. The caveat is it has to be 6 letters, and it has to, we already have the last 3 letters picked out, ODY.
So you get 3 letters.
So you get 3 letters. So some people just went with the shortened version of their first name, which is why I went with Karoti. Other people went with like aspects of their physical appearance. Like there was a guy named like Taloti, who was like the tallest guy there. There was like Soroti. I can't remember why he had picked that name, but yeah, they had this thing where all of them had names ending in ODY.
Which again takes away your identity when your name sounds like everybody else's.
Again, is that something? Is this the first time? It is. I mean, we haven't covered a ton of cults or anything like that. This is the first time we've run into an instance of stripping the individual aspect of it away by actually having the name changed.
Yeah, well, into something similar like everybody else's.
Yeah.
You get the illusion of choice that you get to choose the first part, but in the end, it's going to end up like everybody else's name. We still get to be Doe and T because we're the leaders. We're ascended already. We're on the next level. We're here to help you peons, the Odies. Oh, this is where we get into some real fun stuff. So as Chris alluded to earlier, the kitchen had a special name, the Nutrilab. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner were referred to as the first, second, and third experiments. Bedrooms were called rest chambers. Your house, obviously, was your craft. Your laundry room.
Like spacecraft.
Yeah.
Not like Joanne Fabric's craft.
R.I.P. House was the craft. The laundry room was the fiber lab. Mm-hmm. So you're in there mixing it up in the fiber lab, cleaning some things.
And if you're going to make it sound like you're already on a spaceship, what are you going to call the people there? The crew.
Yeah, that's right. There was the crew.
So they were known as the crew.
Your body was known as your vehicle. Your brain was known as your computer. Your sex organs were known as your plumbing.
Yeah, that's right.
And when we're talking about sex organs, we're going to be doing an outsized amount for a normal episode beyond the dick jokes that we usually make. When it comes to nocturnal emissions, that's just a fact of your vehicle. That's what your earthly body does.
Sometimes
it's not perfect.
You have a dream and you start grinding your vehicle's plumbing against the mattress and stuff happens. And you know what? It's a natural biological function, but you're supposed to transcend your human biological functions. So this became something where, because there wasn't supposed to be that human gratification, it became shameful to do it. So they developed a system where apparently there were enough of these. I hate calling it nocturnal emissions, and I also hate calling it wet dreams.
Wet dreams.
The sleep, when you have the sleep comes. So
when the sleep tsunami comes.
No, I just meant it like CUM, like the sleep comes. So you have your nocturnal emission, and there are designated towels that are supposed to be used that are like a stack of shame towels.
This is going to sound dumb.
And you're supposed to go over and clean yourself up with them and everything. And then I guess that aspect alone, initially, the aspect of you having to use this shame towel that's designated for essentially this failure on your part, that is what's supposed to try to prevent you from doing something you do in your sleep going forward. Well, apparently this didn't really stem the flow of semen.
No.
Because all of the towels just kept getting used up, and then they had to implement, they're like, okay, they're not feeling shameful enough. They're just using up all the jizz towels. Okay, we're going to make a accountability. We need to put more accountability on this. Sign-in sheet. Okay, so right next to the jizz towels, I imagine was a clipboard with a pen, like if you're a guest at a gym, and you would have to actually, probably print and sign your name, Karoti, and date, probably time, and then did you have to say like what you dreamed about or anything like that?
Well, the other part about the sign-in sheet and everybody having similar names is you can't just throw like a Rod Stewart on there.
No.
You can't make up a name to try to cover your tracks.
We talked about it before recording, but that was a situation you were also supposed to tell your accountability buddy about. So how do you approach that? It happens, you wake up, do you go clean yourself up first, or do you have to go immediately report it? And if you do, what do you nudge him? Hey, wake up. Oh, what? He's like, I had an accident. What? I jizzed in my pants. All right, let's go sign you in. Let's go sign out your jizz towel. It's not going to be a fun morning for you.
You had to have a co-signer.
All of a sudden, accountability buddy undoes the sheets and gets up and finds out he had one too. And he's like, oh, so we either both sign the sheet or we both don't sign the sheet. What do we do?
Or one of us signs the sheet and then we both use the rag.
No, who's taking the fall on that?
Rock, paper, scissors, Rochambeau. I don't know if that's an earthly thing. The dumb thing that I was thinking was everything that I learned about the cum towels they were reserved only for the male members.
Yeah.
Don't women have wet dreams?
Oh man, I'm asking the tough questions. I don't believe so.
As two men in long-term relationships, I feel like that should be something we know.
I don't believe so.
Okay, so maybe the ladies didn't need the towels.
Oh my God, am I having to Google this?
Yeah, that's
Why are you even bringing the... Man,
well,
this is the shit that gets clipped.
I'm equal opportunities here.
Okay.
We don't clip anything. So yeah, these spunk towels that had to be signed out, it was just such a mental game. And you know that when they introduced a special washcloth, it was going to be like, yeah, maybe one or two of these will get used a week. Immediately when the cupboard is bare and there's none left.
Okay. It's a halfway between what you were thinking.
Okay.
Yes, they can have wet dreams. Essentially, it would be a nocturnal orgasm, which I think is much better than nocturnal emission because it covers both sexes, so it doesn't just apply to men. But yes, they can have one, but because it is not normal for a woman to have an ejaculate or anything like that during an orgasm, that's why they would not be in need of a towel. So yeah, so the ladies could get away with it.
I'm so sorry to any female listeners for that last 5 minutes. That was tough for us.
That was 2.5 minutes tops.
Okay. It felt like forever.
And hey, the more you know.
Yeah. But like you were talking about, once you put pen to paper, once your name is out there, there's no hiding under like maybe nobody's around the bathroom when you grab your towel. Now it's on a sign-in sheet that somebody has to pull down and replace every single day. And you're like, well, shit, Roddy's been on here 15 times in the last month.
I want to imagine it like like in military movies where they have the weapons locker and the cage and everything. Like Danny DeVito in Taxi.
Yes.
He's behind the cage and everything like that. That's how I want to imagine it. He's just in the jizz towel cage. Someone has to come up, show that they came in their pants, and then he passes him the sign-out sheet and then slaps a towel down. And he's like, "Oh, you're in trouble now, kid."
The Italian kid in Caddyshack, when Danny comes up to get the Coke and he slides in the money out from underneath the cage, and he's like, he had to raise the prices. He lost money at the track.
Oh, that's right.
He takes the money back. He just reaches across and he grabs the towel. He goes, "You ain't getting no jizz towel." So the 80s kind of start to get tough on the teachings. 1980, they had about 80 followers, decent numbers. They started to change a little bit because you have this computer age that's coming up. You're starting to get people that are more well-versed in this. So, and again, they're not preying on the lower uneducated members of society. It's everybody. So you're getting people that are coming in with computing degrees. You're getting people that are good mechanically, that know how to take things apart, put them back together.
College educated, and their viewpoint on that was like, we want people that are going to actually be running this thing.
Yeah.
That was their concept of, they kind of went the other direction where Jonestown really didn't have people going out, having a lot of jobs. They kind of worked within like the community and everything like that.
Huddled masses. They were lower people in society, that needed the help.
But they were basically trying to pull in people that were, functional members that could actually contribute. And so that's also where the questions come up, been like, God damn it. Like, at what point did you not see through this? But again, they're pulling from a gigantic pool and their numbers were never huge. I feel like the comparison is always going to be the numbers thing with Jonestown and everything. But yeah, the people that were there were fucking, pretty capable.
Well, and I think the difference is Jonestown was, people were looking for somebody to help them, whereas these people that were a part of Heaven's Gate were looking for somebody to explain to them. They wanted to have something to believe in over needing the help.
The explanation was that they can help themselves.
Yeah.
So that was the difference, I think, is Jonestown wanted Jim Jones to help them, whereas these people were being provided essentially a toolkit and a purpose of why they should, help them improve themselves.
Yeah. So if you had these people that are skilled laborers, you might as well go send them out to have jobs to be able to start bringing in a little bit of money. I'm sure probably once they got into the houses and they started realizing how nice it was to have like a bed again and not being at the campground, like, we got to keep this going.
Pesky things like that, cars that they had to have to drive around town.
Yeah. 1982, they started allowing calls to families again. By 1983.
Can you imagine that though? From the time some of these people left, because when we get down to, the final dates, some of these people have been in it for 20 years.
Yeah, career members.
The fucking long haulers.
Tenured.
But even at this point, this thing kind of kicks off in 75, I think it was. We're in 82, 7 years. There are people that probably have not heard from these family members, maybe in that 7-year period, or maybe in 5 years or something like that. That first initial call, when like a fucking parent hears from their kid and it's like, oh my God, like, where are you? Like, and then you hear the explanation of, I'm living in this group, Heaven's Gate, and we're learning about all this kind of stuff of how we can ascend to the next level and achieve the next planet, which is heaven. And I'm studying with Jesus and God. Hearing that over the phone has got to be like you're so elated to hear from this person that you may have thought you didn't know if they were fucking dead or anything like that. And then when you have this thought of like, oh my God, I can get this person back. and then you hear this shit, that has got to fuck with your mind so much.
It does. And
I like how you do it. Does.
Well, I look at it, sadly, I look at this more from the cult side, because I'm sure those people are related, and then just the depression of your loved one being like, but I'm not coming home.
Yeah.
I'm talking to you guys. I'm telling you this. I'm sharing this with you. Eventually in 83, I'm coming to visit you.
Yeah, you
but
have
it's
to visit
only
for Mother's Day.
It's only for a finite amount of time to where you know that they're going to be leaving again.
What were they told to tell them? Like when they went out for Mother's Day, what were they told to explain to their families where they were?
Oh, what was it?
They were studying computers at a monastery.
At a monastery. That's...
If you asked me the last place that there would be computers,
monastery,
I could probably list that in the first 3 guesses.
Yeah, that's a bridge too far. But me looking at it from the cult side,
people don't know enough about computers. I guess you're in 83. Computers are a complete unknown. People think they're magic at this point.
That's the size of rooms.
Computers, of course they have it.
The reason that I try to dull it down is because I know looking at this is from the cult aspect of this, all it is a test.
Mm-hmm.
You have these people that you want to be wholly devoted to the cause. You're allowing them free agency to be able to leave when they want. How do you know that these people are going to be in it for the long haul? If you can send them home to their own previous worlds and have them still believe in you enough to be able to leave a second time.
So another test.
Yeah. It's just testing the faith and devotion.
Which, how many people do you think saw it as a test?
I don't think any of them did. I think they saw it as...
I think they did.
Really? I think they were paranoid going into it?
I think there had to be some aspect of... Because again, this is something where they are doing daily classes. They would spend day and just listen to fucking Bonnie and Applewhite talk about this. Like, how much different stuff can you lecture on during years of explaining the people that had jobs? Thank God they hadn't been like, oh, thank fuck, I get to go to work.
Work release.
I don't even care if I hate my job. It's like to get away and not have to hear this for 8 hours a day is something. But yeah, so they're just being given all this information about, they have to improve themselves and they're being told you have to cut these human ties in order to level up. That to me seems like that should be a clear-cut indication of like, we're going to let you go and see your families for Mother's Day. Instantly, I think in the mindset of these people, they're like, this is a test. I'm going to have to go because if I don't go, they're going to think that I'm not going because I'm not fully devoted and I'm scared that if I go, I'm not coming back. So I have to go and I will come back and that will show them that I am 100% in. I think these people saw that as a test and not as, they didn't seem to me like they were really interested in like the luxury aspect of this, of being like provided. They could have left at any time. Any of them could have gone.
Yeah. But
it was the fact that they gave them permission, I think probably made the fucking hairs on the back of their neck stand up and be like, oh, okay, we're going to go and take the test and we're going to pass the test by coming back.
And maybe it's just because of this, what I'm about to say, but the way that I frame it in my mind was the reason that we can call these things tests is because of hindsight. I think when they're in it, they don't realize that these things are ever tests because they're never told that they're tests. Everything is just always based on faith and belief of saying, we've given you these things. We trust you. We need to verify, but at the same time, do you view a test of faith as a test? Or are you thinking more in the terms of just academic type thing? Because I think if you're saying like, we have faith in you that you're going to come back, that technically is that test of faith. It's just not put forward as a test.
I think some people had to realize it.
And again, these weren't dumb people. These were all fairly smart individuals. That's
how I think I have to justify the fact that so many people came back. One person stayed, right?
I don't know how many people stayed.
I think I heard one. I maybe heard 3.
Oh, stayed at home. Didn't come back.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. One person didn't come back.
One person didn't come back. So that to me kind of has me thinking that these people knew that it was very important that they go back for their standing.
Well, and also we don't know what the people that came back were told about the person that left. Was this an amicable thing? Were they okay with it, or were they like, he didn't pass? He fell to these worldly things. So there is that aspect of it too.
Maybe the other thing too, thinking of kind of how this is going to go, and I think it does take a pivot off the, after the events that are going to happen to Bonnie that we're really going to discuss. But part of me also thinks, and I didn't get a ton of details on if the fact of this thing, they were allowed to visit every year. I imagine it was probably something that wasn't just like, hey, for the year of 1983, you get to go visit for Mother's Day and then that's it.
Yeah.
I think also if they decided they go back that first time, they're probably it's going to initially start out with everyone happy to see them. Then it's going to turn to like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, this is insane. Like, please explain this. Well, it's computers and it's in a monastery. That's fucking crazy. Yeah, well, I can't tell you the actual fucking crazy part of it. Those people end up going back feeling probably like if they just go back again, they're going to deal with that same type of stuff, those same questions, that same pressure not to go back. I think that would incentivize people to make that choice and say, you know what? I saw them. They weren't supportive of it. I'm now fully into this and I don't need to go ahead and see these things I'm cutting like I'm supposed to these human attachments to my fucking vehicle from the outside world.
Yeah, this wasn't what I remember because I was told and programmed to not remember the good things.
These people are not upset at me here. They're trying to help me become a better version of myself or to ascend. I came home and yeah, you guys were happy to see me, but then you were upset at me and mad at me. I'm going back to the people that accept me and are trying to help me.
Yeah.
That's what's so crazy about the fucking mind fuck of this.
Trying to get into the minds of cult leaders. This was an interesting time for what we're about to talk about because they were introducing this idea. It was the concept of a walk-in. And basically the concept of a walk-in was a extraterrestrial being that had walked into the body of someone who was already living on the planet. Mm-hmm. And they did that in order to be able to talk and communicate, just like the Luciferians took over the bodies in their walk-ins of politicians and other church leaders and all that, that Applewhite and Nettles had done this walk-in to these two bodies. So this isn't their accurate representation. This is just the two bodies that they assumed on the earth.
Yes.
And these were the bodies that they were going to use to be able to get to the next level, to be able to
get back to the next level, to help these other people get there as well.
So you would assume that based upon that logic and what they were saying, that their bodies would be traveling onto the crafts as well, that they would be able to hold up. Well, in 1983, Bonnie ends up getting diagnosed with cancer. She has brain cancer. She has an eye removed. She had a glass eye put in. Disappointing that she didn't rock the eye patch because I feel like that would be a better look. But how do you start to try to justify that these vessels are going to be coming with you when God's vessel is fallible?
Yeah, like the whole point of this is this ascension or this rising to the next level has to happen since you are taking your body. You have to physically be transported. Something has to physically get you there. Well, what happens if there's no body when that's ready to go? Because if nobody's graduated yet or anything, and all of a sudden you're like, well, it's coming right now, we're going to be leaving. You can't rush that because it's not really going to happen. And so you have to try to develop this loophole of how to explain how if there's no body, someone can still rise up to the next level. And so that's what, once she's diagnosed with cancer, and they maybe know that they're kind of on a ticking clock at this point, they kind of have to start fudging some of the details and creating little loopholes to make this thing still work.
Yeah. And by the time they really found out that Bonnie was in a bad spot, the cancer had already metastasized. It had moved down to her stomach and was just kind of eating her from the inside. She would end up ascending to the next level on her own in, I believe it was 1985.
Yeah, yes. So June 19th, 1985, she was 57.
And throughout this thing, throughout losing T, throughout all of this talk about walk-ins and ascending to the bodies, after she dies, only one person leaves.
Well, it's phrased in a way, so I imagine that there has to be some type of, because once she found out that it was inoperable and that it was terminal, It was very quick. I think it was maybe a matter of maybe even like a week
Yeah.
or 2 weeks or something like that. When that happened, there had to be a fucking discussion between her and Applewhite of being like, it all comes apart. If they see that your vehicle dies, then you're not able to, like, it completely takes away this whole thing. And I think part of this was, again, he's still in this. So he's like, please make this make sense. Like how, like, even if he's mentally or he's not in this, he's like, what do we come up with to explain how this has happened? And he ends up explaining it in the way that because Bonnie was already a being of the next level, she was God, essentially because her spirit was so powerful, it actually had burned out the body, which they could then tie into the fact that, like, you know, she wasn't in this body from birth or anything like that. She had possessed this body. And so this body only lasted as long as you guys had known Bonnie, or I first met Bonnie in, 1975 and we came together in 1974 or whatever.
Turns out she just bought herself a lemon.
Exactly.
She walked into a lemon.
She was redlining it, bro, and her fucking hoopty broke down. And so, but because it's Bonnie and because it's God, she was actually able to go ahead and get to the next level because she doesn't require taking that physical vessel with her. And before she left, she was telling me I still had things to learn that I hadn't learned 2,000 years ago, and that it was my job to stay and learn those things, but to also make sure all of you graduated to the point where you can then ascend to as well when the time comes.
Without your vessels. Without your bodies.
Well, and this is when kind of the addendums into these rule. It became like guideline 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or just whatever their philosophy had been for like the bodies and everything. But then what happened is there was like, oh, did you not, subsection A is what you actually need to read. And all of a sudden subsection A gets brought in here, and it covers pretty much any scenario in which your body can be destroyed, being destroyed by an outside force, something regarding illness. Basically, it was like, hey, guess what? There's a lot of things out there that can, kill your vehicle. So kind of if your vehicle dies, you can still actually like level up. And what's going to be, how is that going to be proven not to be the case? Because someone else ends up dying, they're fucking dead. And then all of a sudden Applewhite can just be like, no, you know what? I think they were ready. They leveled up. Or it can be like, they hadn't graduated yet. Unfortunately, everyone needs to be a lot more careful.
Yeah. You can even use a death as a learning tool to be like, they didn't ascend. They didn't do enough. Bonnie was already to the point where she was able to ascend. Mm-hmm. They weren't. So that spirit stays with that vessel.
Work harder. Because this could happen, and if you're not ready, if you're not graduated at this point, you're not going to make it if you get taken out early.
And yeah, after Bonnie goes, Applewhite has just a major crisis of confidence.
It's back to that lowest spot, probably the lowest at this point, because this was his thing. Now this was his only thing, and he's having these questions of, well, Bonnie's the idea man. She's the mystic. She was God. She was the one that was actually, I was the one that was, I was the helmsman. She was the captain behind me being like, take her 3 degrees to port or starboard or whatever. And then I was like, okay. And I turned it a little bit. I was the one that was steering the ship. But without Bonnie, like, what do I do? And falls into this really deep depression, basically is scared of everybody leaving and has to lean on everyone, tells everyone. He's like, I'm going to need to lean on you during this time. This is harder for me because of, Bonnie, being my father and all this kind of stuff. And then having, staying here because I still have stuff to learn. And eventually they're able to build him back up. Like you said, only one person ends up leaving at this time. It's the same thing that happened when the ship didn't show up. Guys, it canceled. We're even more bummed about this than you. All of a sudden, the attention turns from questions about, well, Bonnie's gone. What are we supposed to do? Can Applewhite lead us to, we need to take care of this guy and get him back to where he can lead us.
Well, it only makes sense. We kind of talked about it in our warm up before the episode. It seems like the only times that Applewhite really sees things clearly is in a depressive state, because that was kind of the last state that he was in before this whirlwind of learning from Bonnie and meeting Bonnie.
I think, kind of to elaborate on that, I think when you say clearly, I think that's when reality starts to sink in for him, and he doesn't like it. And he knows that there's a much more comfortable place. Like what he has in this is he likes this so much more. He's like, I got to get out of this fucking reality. I need you guys to be around me to get me back into this mindset and not have me questioning this shit, because I'm starting to think that some of this might not be real, maybe. So you guys are going to have to convince me otherwise. And it ends up happening.
Well, he tightens everything back up. We didn't mention it earlier.
He makes it tighter. He starts adding extra holes to the belt, because one of the things he does is he gives everybody $100.
Before that,
okay.
Well, it's a fantastic story that I'm very excited to talk about. Prior to Bonnie leveling up, they had this thing that they called the 17 steps. And these 17 steps are what Chris and I alluded to earlier, that this was kind of like a light nagging, almost trying to turn the blame of anything back towards you. I'm not going to read all 17 because there's a shitload of them.
It was basically sitting down at the bar with a 10 and you're like a 4, and she has had enough to drink to where you're asking her questions in order to lower her self-esteem in order to try to have a shot at her. This is exactly what this is.
Yeah. Number 1, can you follow instructions without adding your own interpretation? So that's literally saying, do you allow yourself to take in information without putting your own personal biases on it to maybe corrupt what I've told you? 3, do you participate in inconsiderate conversation, polluting the ears of others while you and your partner are working things out? Are you throwing other people under the bus? Instead of taking accountability for something yourself, are you pushing this onto somebody else? Number 8, do you use more of something than is adequate? For example, excessively high cooking flame, more toothpaste than necessary, etc. Mm-hmm. Are you taking more than your deserving share in being gluttonous?
Well, part of that whole thing that we talked about with dressing everybody alike, everybody having the same haircuts. Did we even mention the voice thing? That everyone, because they wanted it to seem so androgynous and genderless, that
they raised and lowered the pitch of their voice.
So if you had a deeper voice, you had to raise the pitch of it. If you had a higher voice, they wanted to make it to where you couldn't delineate between a male and a female voice. That's how this is when it starts to like get into, now that they know that they have these people and these people aren't fucking leaving, they basically tried to old yeller or White Fang these people. Get out of here. I don't want you. And then White Fang came back and they knew they had White Fang. Yeah. So all these people are now locked in, and this is when shit starts getting tighter because, again, you have all these rules. They're putting people on specific diets, because they said that the acclimation to the sustenance that they're going to be receiving in their new bodies at the next level, because that's what it changes to. You're not taking your body with you anymore. Your new body is going to be waiting there. You're getting a fucking upgrade. You're going from that Geo Metro into that fucking Bentley, baby. And so you had to acclimate your human vehicle, because somehow that was going to impact how your spirit would then interact in your new vehicle with the stuff that they were feeding you. I just said that, and I realized that makes no fucking sense. So how did anyone buy that?
It goes along with this kind of stuff, though. Just a couple more of these, because I feel like these are the hot ones. His familiarity caused you to become so relaxed with your partners or others that your actions or words don't hold enough restraint. So are you so comfortable in your situation that you're allowed to, or that you feel that you should be allowed to speak freely and speak your own mind and opinion? Like, just it's so controlling.
You're just like, no, yes.
Are you?
Yes.
Are you?
No, yes.
Gentle, simple, cautious, and thoughtfully restrained in your steps and all other physical actions or words. So, do you speak softly enough and not try to raise any dissension by saying something harsh to somebody else? Like, you're just trying to dull down any emotions that these people have, that they have to think about everything that they say to make sure that they don't offend Doe or T.
You're keeping them so focused on trying to stop doing things that are complete human nature to do.
Yeah.
Like, how often does someone do something to piss you off and you got to call up your significant other or text your boys or whatever and being like, guess what just fucking happened? But if you can be focusing and being like, I can't do that. That's guideline number 1 or guideline number 3 that I'm not supposed to do that. But you're still having those thoughts. You're so focused on why you're having those thoughts and how come I got to stop having these fucking thoughts because I'm not going to be able to get to the next level if I'm having these.
I have to be able to push these out.
It internalizes everything and just puts it right back on you to keep you distracted.
Well, Marshall, once he's captain of the ship, once Jesus is running the team, he changes this to the major offenses and lesser offenses. And lesser offenses is a shitload of them, so I'm not going to go through all of them. But major offenses, number 1 is deceit. A, and I'm reading these directly off the still active Heaven's Gate website. A, doing an act on the sly. B, lying to my teachers or any of my classmates. C, keeping an offense to myself and not exposing it the same day. So not even pondering to be like, should I say this? Number 2, major offense, sensuality. Permitting arousal in thought or in action, not nipping it in the bud. Don't know what in the fuck that means.
Guilty as charged.
In that scenario. Number 3, breaking any instruction or procedure knowingly. So these are the major offenses that you can commit to have that. And lesser offenses, taking any action without using my check partner, trusting my own judgment or using my own mind. A lesser offense, but still an offense, is using your own mind. Twisting procedures to my own benefit.
And we've kind of gone back and forth about this aspect of it during the week, but this is such a hard pivot for me. And it's... you know the meme of I think we've actually even used it on socials, but the one about the car and it's pulling itself over to go off on the off ramp. Like, I feel like coming up here, the path is laid out. You can keep kind of going along the same path as Bonnie's teachings. You can fudge it a little bit, tighten the reins, but then certain things come up where it's like, don't get off on that fucking off ramp. Don't get off. And that you just fucking jerk the wheel. Like, such hard pivots or overcorrections that it gets even more what the fuck than this.
Yeah. And this isn't to say, I'm not trying to give him an out. I'm not trying to justify what he did. He's a bad man, or was a bad man. But at the same time, you also have to feel like now that he's in it by himself, he doesn't have a checks and balances. No. So the reason that he's making such drastic changes are because he's never driven the car before.
Yeah.
So it's like, what he's doing is awful. I'm not trying to give him any sort of an out on this, but his mind just isn't quite in the area to try to ease things into existence.
Tim Robinson, when the guy's yelling at him, he's like, do you not know how to fucking drive? He's like, no, I don't.
This is my first time.
No, and so he starts just kind of taking these like big swings, and again, there's no one there to really tell him that this is a bad idea or he should do something else. And so a lot of stuff is going to go through that's just like, the fuck is going on here? One of the first things they have to do is they need to start, building up their follower base again.
Yeah.
It's dipped a little bit, especially now that Bonnie is gone. There's probably this fear that they may start losing a couple more people, things like that, and especially with Applewhite, he probably has this huge fear that people are going to find out I don't know what I'm doing, or that I'm not Bonnie, or this thing's going to change drastically for them. I need to get some new blood in here to kind of replenish the ranks.
Same time, I got to make sure that I keep my own blood around.
Yeah.
I need more of a commitment out of these people. Mm-hmm. And now we can get into the story of the giving of the $100.
So he gives everyone $100, and they're fucking confused because they're like, okay, so one of the things we had to do was kind of get rid of all of our, our possessions. But now you're telling us to go out and buy something. He's like, well, what do you think you would buy with $100?
For yourself. Not for anyone else.
Exactly. For yourself. And everyone's just like, okay, this is probably another fucking test. So finally he's like, why doesn't everybody go out and buy a gold ring? And goes out, has everyone buy a gold ring, and then proceeds to essentially marry everybody. I pronounce thee man, woman, woman, man, woman, man, woman, woman. Do that for however many people it is.
And dough. To me, I think it rings true that it just makes so much sense to you too. He lost his life, his family, everybody else around him. He lost his wife and his children. He lost his family when he came out to them. He ends up losing Bonnie, who was his rock for the last 20-ish years, whatever. You got to start making sure that you keep everybody as close as possible. And one way to do that is to enter into a bond of marriage.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that people use it nowadays to trap people.
Just another tie.
Yeah.
Yes. It's just one more connection.
One more emotional investment that you can get out of these people to maybe question leaving you.
It's like when you have all the lassos around like the creature, the dinosaur, and they're like, they're breaking out. And you see 3 more people fire ropes over it. And they're like, oh.
Just trying to hold him in. And I truly think that was the move when he symbolically marries them, just to try to make sure that their relationship, because this is what he was teaching, that their relationship to him was taught as the only way to salvation.
He's establishing that it's now the tie is to him. It's no longer to Bonnie and him or anything. It's now specifically to him. He is the rock in which they will build their church.
Well,
or rocket. He is the rock in which they will build the launch pad in which they will build their rocket.
Part of the issue of losing Bonnie, too, is she's the one that's pushing the alien narrative. She's the one that's pushing the extraterrestrials. So you have to start leaning back into your wheelhouse.
She's the sci-fi writer coming up with all the good shit.
Yeah. There's only so many episodes of Star Trek that you can watch to try to keep up with Bonnie's brain.
Mm-hmm.
So as he's the solo captain of the ship now, he transitions the group back into more of a religious over the science kind of backbone.
Like traditional religious tactics, I guess you would say.
His bread and butter. Yeah. I mean, the guy went to a ministry. He was working towards this.
Cracks his knuckles. He's like, well, okay, what do I know?
Yeah, and he alters this view of ascension that we just talked about, where you don't need to bring your body, your vehicle, your vessel with you. You will be given a new vessel that will be able to house this brilliant essence that you have in your soul. He starts pushing this walk-in concept harder, like we're talking about. After T's death, he begins discussing the apocalypse. And that's really when you start to see things get kind of nuts, because this is right around the time, not quite yet, but when they're starting to film these lectures, when they're starting to film him having these interviews where he's talking about the Earth's recycling.
Yeah, the spading under for like making way for like the next group of humans or something like that.
Except for now, because you're starting to get into more of a technological age, you don't have to go out and do these town halls. You don't have to go out and stand on stage to do this. You can start disseminating these videos. You can have people that are writing you letters maybe that you are getting while you're out on the circuit.
They said they paid for like 12 hours of airtime because they had this like 12-part series or something like that.
It was a pay-per-view?
No, it was on satellite TV.
Oh, satellite TV. That's what it was.
Ain't no one paying for this shit, man. But I was thinking about that. I was like, okay, so this is like is this late 80s, early 90s?
Yes.
Not many people have satellite TV.
No, and if they do, it's because they have a lot of land to put that giant dish out.
No shit. These are not the days of fucking dish TV with the fucking 2.5-foot circle. This is the kind of shit where you have to go out and try to crank it to get the channels from Russia.
You gotta wash it with the hose.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it pays to have them kind of broadcast out these little lectures or speeches, which you can find some of them on YouTube. They're creepy as fuck, but they're hilarious. He's given these speeches, and then he'll be like, what? Like he's answering a question that wasn't asked, and then he'll go into some other stuff. But it's pretty spooky shit. They also go ahead and spend $30,000 on a full-page ad in USA Today, basically warning of Judgment Day that's coming, and that 20 members, or basically it's saying that it gave their contact information or their phone number and stuff like that, and not only did it get attention from people who had never heard of them before, but because they're seeing this as just kind of a reminder, they end up getting 20 of their former members back.
Well, and you got to think, this to me logically, if you left because you had a few questions, but you still had those feelings about the church or about Heaven's Gate, as soon as you see like, oh shit, they're at the end, this is my last chance to try to get on the ship. Like, you're going to be walking back into a completely different way of believing. But at the same time, it's like they never left their beliefs that they want to come back and try to make it happen.
Think of how legitimate that makes you look. You have a full page ad in USA Today. So those people that had even a doubt, like the ones that left, are looking at that being like, oh, they're fucking like serious about this. Like, they're still going about this.
Yeah.
Like, we need to get while the getting's still good.
94, back out on the lecture circuit, they doubled their membership. And like we were talking about with these videos, the 12 hours that Chris was talking about on satellite TV, they recorded, they broke them down into videos. They had this crazy system, and it's still on their website today, where they will send you a copy of the videos for free, and then you're allowed to copy them onto your own tapes and then send them back to you. Or you can just buy the videos flat out. But if you're getting somebody interested enough to be able to write to you at this time looking for more information, and you can send them 12 hours on video, this is where we start to come to kind of the traditional cult of throwing everything at somebody all at once. To where if you have 12 hours of study and he catches you in that first hour, by the time you're finished with the 12 hours, it's like watching a series. By the time you get done, sometimes you don't remember what sparked you into watching it.
I don't know if I can make it through the 12 hours of that. I got through a couple 8-minute clips, and I was just like, I'm going to be seeing this guy in my dreams tonight if I keep watching this shit.
What are you watching it for?
I'm going to end up waking up with ideas and new perspectives on this and being like, oh, fuck, they're making some good points.
Earth's getting plowed. Good morning. The reason that they pulled out the page on USA Today, they weren't Heaven's Gate. They pulled it out under the Total Overcomers Anonymous. COMERS. I'm pretty sure CUMMERS for Overcomers was probably still in play. You think when Applewhite came in by himself, he's like, all right, the towel budget is out of control. We got to rein this in. We need to spend $30,000 on this ad. You guys are going to have to start doubling up on towels. I've had enough of this shit. We'll talk about how he fixes that issue here in a second. But lectures are starting to pay off. They're doubling in membership. Meager amounts of people are still coming in. We're not back into the triple digits or anything like that. The people that they brought in that were working on computers, they're bringing in computer programmers. They're bringing in people that understand how the internet works. And even though this is still kind of the early facets of the internet, you're starting to be able to go onto these message boards. And not only are you posting things that you're putting out there, you're finding out that there's all of these other people out there that believe in aliens. So you're being able to kind of start making a connection inside these communities.
Your pond just got so much bigger without you doing a ton of the work.
Well, and it's just completely honed down to people that are easiest to get.
Yeah.
Like, you're not having to sift through the riffraff. You're right there on your fish.
It's like, what's the one that job, employers can go and search for. Is it on Indeed?
Yeah.
Okay.
No free ads.
It's kind of like but that's what it basically is.
Yeah.
They're able to go on and being like, all right, who is looking to join a UFO cult?
June through October in 1995, the group decides to buy 40 acres in rural New Mexico. It was like a former summer camp or some shit like that. They were planning on building a compound that they called the Earthship. Now, between June and October, everything was good. Rural New Mexico probably got pretty hot, but nothing that they couldn't deal with. Wintertime comes around. Wintertime, apparently, out in rural New Mexico is terrible.
Yeah, people assume deserts don't get cold. They get cold as fuck. There's nothing to block the wind. And, sand will hold heat for a little while, but it gets cold as shit when it gets dark.
So they end up abandoning New Mexico. This Earthship that they were going to build out there, this launch pad, is just like, maybe this was a bad idea. Let's move to sunny San Diego, where wintertime is always pretty mild and pretty much always nice. Now we get into kind of some odd stuff.
Odd is a gentle way of putting that. This is the oddest shit out of all of this.
Well, I tried to break them in easy, but yeah. Applewhite's sexual desires seem to still be an issue, and his appetite for...
Or again, the towel budget was just out of control still.
He had to come up with something. This was him putting a bidet in.
Could have been a healthy combination of the two. So, if you're kicking around ideas, your roundtable discussion, you're spitballing, you're like, listen, how do we solve this jack-off problem? And how you end up solving it, they're like, okay, well, let's get to the root of this. What creates this stuff? They're like, well, our vehicles do. They're like, okay, what part of our vehicles? They're like, our testicles. And he's like, so what should we do? Everyone's like, we don't know. And he's like, let's get rid of our testicles.
Let's rip our plumbing out.
Yeah, let's get rid of an aspect of our plumbing that is actually making us have these urges. And so there's some different information on kind of how this went down. The initial castration, we're getting into it. The initial castration was going to be, I think they drew straws or something like that. I'm dead fucking serious.
That's the worst game of straws ever.
Listen, the person that drew it got to select the first person to do it. So you wanted the short straw, and the person that picked it wanted to show their devotion, so they picked themselves. So I don't know if they found a doctor. They initially didn't find a doctor because they had a nurse. Remember, they had a woman that was within the group that used to be a nurse.
She worked in a surgical consult or something like that.
And so they set up a sterile room in the house that they put a sign above it that said Mexico. So if anybody asked, they could honestly say that they went to Mexico to have the surgery done, and they wouldn't be lying because, number one, can't provide deceit, even though putting Mexico on the door is deceiving because that's not really Mexico.
Yep.
But again, he's making the rules here. So, and everything's going great until they cut into this guy's ball bag and some stuff goes wrong, as it does in a home testicle removal, situation. And do they end up getting done with it and then like an infection or swelling sets in like the next day?
Swelling sets in, the complications start coming.
Yes. So they think they did a good job. They get it stitched up and everything. And all of a sudden now this guy isn't doing so good and they got to figure out something to do with him. Can't call the cops.
Shoot him. Get rid of this guy. He's not looking to ascend if he got sick removing his own testicles.
just swollen, sweating, in pain, being like, "Am I gonna level up yet?" He's like, "Shh, yeah, we'll figure that out."
So somehow they probably drew straws again to see who was going to take him to the hospital.
I think it was one of those situations. We're sitting in the 90s at this point, and probably not a huge town, or they were in San Diego, so there's probably a plethora of places they could probably take them to try to get this done. And probably a lot of people that are sick of seeing people fall on bottles on their assholes and remove them and stuff like that they don't ask a lot of questions.
By getting it done, you mean go to the hospital to fix him?
Yes.
Not do the surgery.
Correct.
I don't think elective testicle removal was...
No, but I think when they took him in finally to the hospital, they were probably just like, what happened to this guy? And they're like, he tried to cut out his own testicles. Maybe they did that because then the blame's off them. We told him not to do it. We were like, hey man, don't cut your own balls off. He's like, I'm going to fucking do it. No one's going to stop me. And now here we are. So can you guys patch him up and we're going to leave? And then I guess when he gets done, he can just come back and join us. That's kind of what happened.
Hospital didn't turn him in. Wild caveat to the story was apparently somebody was concerned that they were going to come and investigate it, so he took his balls to he took the guy's balls to the reservoir and hucked him in the water.
Yep.
It feels unnecessary. Probably could have just dropped him in the trash.
You always dispose of the evidence.
Dispose of the testes.
So you would think this would be like, hey, that whole castration thing, probably shouldn't be doing that, right? And they're like, yeah, probably shouldn't be. We probably shouldn't have done it without an actual doctor. I mean, we thought nurses are pretty capable and everything like that in the 90s. And, but I think we're going to need an actual testicle doctor to get this thing taken care of. And this is the 90s again. I like to envision this as a disgraced doctor had a nasty coke habit. They end up finding this guy and he's like, oh yeah, he's like, I don't fucking cut balls off all day, and find someone that knows what they're doing. And how many people ended up actually getting the castration?
Wasn't it like 9 to 11?
Including Applewhite.
Including Applewhite, yeah.
So 9 people voluntarily elect to have their balls cut off.
I don't understand.
And if we weren't in cult territory up to this point, I mean,
you think that's the line?
If anyone has had their doubts, it is now just completely. You can't argue this now.
I've made some bad choices in my life based on penile decisions, but I've never made a bad enough choice in my life to just want to eradicate that decision maker.
Yeah, I mean, we've all had talks with our dicks after it did something. It took us into a situation that we weren't proud of. It's like, come on, man. Like, what are you doing out here? You know I'm not in my right mind, and you start making the decisions.
Yeah, that's, but never a decision to just want to exit them.
You never blame the balls, though.
No.
But probably a little bit crazier to actually cut off if you're just looking to be castrated and being like, just take it all. Probably a lot more of a recovery on that, too.
So this is the part that blows me away. That was surgical castration. There's also means of chemical castration that we still do today for a various number of reasons. But one of them is if you're a sex pervert or a predator, not a pervert. There's a lot of legal sex perverts out there too. But
Guilty.
something that I found out that I thought was just wildly crazy. If you're chemically castrated, you can still achieve erections. Like 10% of people that are chemically castrated can still achieve an erection.
So not great odds, but still possible.
Yeah, which is a scary thought. You're
still playing the lottery with those odds.
It's a scary thought that somebody can still have enough testosterone flowing through their body even...
Yeah, it takes you 10 times as long as it normally would. Like every 10th day you wake up with a morning wood, you're like, eureka.
If we're doing that to sexual predators, that seems like it's a scary thing that there's still a chance that they can break through the wall.
Yeah, but they're trying to line up the odds.
Chance.
It lessens the chance of being like, is this going to be the 9 times out of 10 that he can't,
Apparently that pushed Marshall too far to where he's like, can't go that route. We got to go surgical. We just got to take him out. I can't explain it beyond it's just a cult.
We don't put chemicals in our vehicles.
Yeah. And also at the same time, it provides more uniformity to this gender look that he's going for. I don't know if it does anything to maybe this is just dumb man brain, but it has to do something to the octaves in your voice, right?
At that point, I don't think so. I think the whole point of from the stories about trying to keep I don't know if it was Greece or where it was, but trying to keep certain voices for opera singers or singers lower, they would castrate boys at certain ages because then they would never reach the development to change the octave level. So I think at this point, if you do that, of course, it's going to have some crazy fucking side effects, but I don't know if it's necessarily going to be that. That's one I think is kind of just you naturally think about that.
Yeah.
But I think your vocal cords are probably already developed at that point.
Set enough. I don't know why we're focusing on this. I know why we're focusing on this so much.
Because it's batshit fucking crazy.
Yeah, man. It's absolutely impossible to try to justify any of this stuff. October 1996, they ran a mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California, just outside of San Diego suburb. They record 2 messages offering viewers this last chance to evacuate Earth. They post them online. Also, they start to kind of see in some of these UFO and astrology groups, astronomer groups, something called the Hale-Bopp Comet will be making its way into the Earth's atmosphere.
I always thought it was the Hale-Bopp Comet.
That's what I thought too.
Okay.
Hale-Bopp, I mean, it doesn't sound as cool as it. I figured somebody named Haley and somebody named Bob discovered it. I'm sure Hale and Bob are their last names.
Actually, one person's name, Haley-Bopp.
Haley-Bopp.
Yeah.
She was androgynous. They were androgynous too.
Susie Q, Haley-Bopp.
But what was odd about this comet was there seemed to be, and I didn't look up the explanation for this. I'm just assuming based on my own dumb brain that what was following it that looked like a spaceship was probably just a smaller rock.
They said it was bigger. They said the size of it was huge, that something was trailing it, but...
It was big enough that you could see Hale-Bopp with the naked eye, and then you could see something below it.
Yeah, and I mean, that could be... I don't know enough
Space
about
gases.
distortion behind the comet of its trail that makes something appear to be behind it. It refracts the light differently because it has to travel so far. I don't fucking know.
Well, I don't know why we're sitting here trying to ponder on this when we know that that was T in the spaceship that was going to be coming down to get them.
Exactly. She
So-
was not coming down.
I guess
She was just
traveling
swinging,
across.
Yeah, she was swinging by. She was going to slow down for like a moving pickup.
to meet him on the run. This was going to be a real hangover situation when Alan's buddy's throwing him the tuxes when they're on the freeway.
Exactly.
So yeah, this is kind of where this plan starts to take shape. And this is when Marshall starts to kind of talk about this idea of suicide to be able to leave their vessels behind in the spaceship. This is their ascension that they've been working for almost 20 years at this point, trying to get to this point to be able to bring themselves to be able to board this ship, to transcend to the next level.
We already have established that the vessels aren't needed. We simply need to make sure that we're available to get to the next level when the opportunity presents itself.
And by March 97, this group starts to isolate inside the mansion.
At this point, the numbers, because of the time frame and what we're going to be getting to, they had attracted, people, but they did also lose people as some of the more extreme shit, like the castration. Even people that weren't down with the castration were like, this is pretty fucking crazy. Like, I think we're going to go ahead and take a step back. So when all is said and done, you have a total of, I think, 39 people.
42
that were at this mansion. And yeah, this is essentially kind of the last stand, I guess you could call it.
Yeah, and this
or
is
the launch pad, I guess.
Yeah, that's actually probably better. This is kind of where the videos to me start to point out just how much of a cult this was. They start recording these farewell statements that are going to be left behind. As far as the farewell statements go, I watched a fair amount of them, and it starts to become very obvious. They say that they're not coached. They say that they're doing it under their own will. They say that they know how this is going to be looked at as far as outsiders. They don't want this to be known as a cult. They want to talk about this in a way of this was a religious movement. This was something that they were doing to get to the next level. And in doing that, it kind of changes the narrative, because if you know that that's what it is and you're not concerned that that's how other people are going to view it, the other worldly people are going to view it, why are you mentioning it?
Yeah.
Why are you saying that you're doing this under your own volition? Why are you not, if you don't believe that if you believe that you're doing it for yourself, you don't got to mention it. There's no reason to continue to bring it up and to keep trying to harbor or to push this point home.
And like everyone was so fucking happy in these videos, and they were so fucking sold on this idea. It's fucking creepy.
They waited 20 years for this.
I know, yeah.
Can you imagine waiting 20?
Not all of them, but I mean, they were finally reaching the culmination of all of that, especially those people that had been the long haul ones. Like, it's the culmination of everything they've ever done and their loyalty and all that kind of stuff. And how do you celebrate? How are you going to go out with a bang? You're going to go to Marie Callender's in Carlsbad. You're going to get everyone around dinner salads, turkey pot pies, wash it down with some iced tea, and in the night, cheesecake with blueberries.
This is the most disgusting thing about this episode. You're going to Marie Callender's, a place that's world famous for their pies, and you're getting cheesecake?
I mean, I think they're pretty good with cheesecake too.
When I hear Marie Callender's, I just think pies.
But okay, and then, do you disassociate cheesecake only with the Cheesecake Factory? Listen, maybe Doe did not like pie.
Maybe he wasn't a pie guy?
Yeah.
Well, we know that.
They already had turkey pot pie.
Oh, yeah, you can't do two pies in a meal. That's insane.
It's fucking the craziest thing you've even suggested in this entire episode.
These nut choppers are going to have two pies. From all accounts, the staffs that they did interview said that everybody was pretty polite. There was nothing odd about these people other than the fact that they all looked the same, dressed the same, ordered the same thing, probably didn't have fun conversations.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing odd about the fact that they look like they were members of the what's the band that has all the people wearing the colored robes? Except it was like khakis and button-up shirts.
I was going to say the Monkees.
The Technicolor Dreamcoat or whatever it's
Joseph
called.
and the Technicolor Dreamcoat.
Yeah, I can't remember what they're called. But you have these people show up, and then I imagine it might be like a Shining situation where they're like, okay, what can we get for y'all? And the whole table just turns and faces and in unison in the same fucking pitch of voice that they've all been practicing. Side salad, turkey pot pie, iced tea, cheesecake with blueberries. Thank you.
Okay, can I talk you guys into any extras? Maybe, what are you looking for in your turkey pot pie? You need a side.
You just hear the sound of the heads turning. No, thank you.
Yeah, dude, that Marie Callender's doesn't seem like it would be my last meal option.
Oh, shit. We didn't even mention the fact that, okay, so that was the last meal, but...
Yeah, we got the week of fun or the 2 weeks of fun, I think, leading up to it.
We forgot that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know how we forgot about this because I didn't want to sell it. Marie Callender is probably still one of the highlights of this whole thing. But prior to that, and because Marshall knows that shit's going down, he's like, hey, let's take this show on the road. Let's go hit all of the famous Heaven Gate sites. We'll do a little vacation-y type shit just to make sure we're taking one more lap around, doing some fun stuff before, because this is the last time we can do it. We're leaving this planet. Let's enjoy what it is. So they go up to Oregon to the spot where essentially Heaven's Gate was kind of founded as far as that goes.
Gold Beach, where Doe and T saw their spacecraft.
Yeah, exactly. They go, while they're in San Diego, they go to SeaWorld. They go to the San Diego Zoo, I believe. They even take a trip to fabulous Las Vegas, where, of course, they stay in the stratosphere. Looks like a fucking spaceship. And they're provided $3,000 spread amongst them in gambling money. Go fucking live it up.
I have such a hard time with this. What's the impetus behind this? Like, why is he doing this? Because
to ease his conscience.
You just spent the last 20 years telling people to reject all earthly temptations, and then you take them to probably the one place on the planet where every earthly temptation is at your
maybe it's the
fingertips.
final test, man. Maybe it was one of the final tests. And I also think it's the fact that there had to have been... I want to... The person that wants to believe that not all people are just this fucking gullible or can lead people into this without feeling any type of remorse wants me to think that there had to be a part of him that was like, yeah, I'm like 50-50 on this thing. Like, this could actually work or this isn't going to work. And to kind of maybe ease the feelings that he was having about being guilty of doing this, he was like, I'm going to take him out for a nice fucking vacation, round of turkey pot pies. And then if it doesn't work, guess what? I showed him a good time.
This is feeding your dog chocolate before they pass.
Yeah, exactly.
And unfortunately, that's kind of what it is. But, I mean, we got to put a good ending on this trip to Vegas. They left up.
Exactly. In the black $60.
Including, what was it, like a $20 bill they found on the sidewalk or some shit like that?
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, it's a wash. You come back $60 richer. Obviously, they're not coming back, so nobody was so excited about winning and gambling. They didn't plan a return trip.
Okay, so then all that, then Marie Callender's. Now we're getting to it.
Yeah. So between March 22nd, March 23rd, in 1997, there were 39 members. We'll talk about, I don't remember the third guy's name. He was an Italian guy. So Mark and Sarah King ended up not being a part of this at the mansion. Mm-hmm. They left. Apparently they left the cult because they just fell in love in the cult and were like, we're cool. We want to be fine with you guys, but we're going to see our love thing through.
Yeah.
If we ascend, we ascend.
Weren't they together when they came in?
I don't think they were. I think they met inside the group. But they agreed to still operate Tela. I didn't look up what it was, but it's their foundation. And more than likely, they're the two that still maintain the website today. So there was like a point in time where they even put back channels in. So if the United States were to pull it down, they could use satellites from other countries. And again, we're still talking about a time when satellite means internet. So it's very odd. But they were left off. There was another guy, Italian guy. I don't know his name. Forgot to look it up. Omission on my part. But he was actually the one that they mailed all of the videos to, all of the confessions, or I guess not confessions, but last messages, you would call it to. I say confessions because it sounds like confessions. So those 3 are gone. 39 members. They were all between the ages of 26 and 72. Hard, fast rule, silver lining to this whole thing. Nobody under 18 was ever admitted into Heaven's Gate. Yeah. So they couldn't prey on children, and children did not commit suicide. Thank Ahura Mazda that was the good part of this whole entire thing.
One of the biggest things between this and Jonestown essentially is that, again, these people were whole hog into this kind of stuff, not being held at a compound.
Yeah. They're believed to have died in 3 groups over 3 days. Remaining participants after the ceremonies, and I call them ceremonies, we'll talk about it here a little bit, gets a little rough. We'll soldier through it. Would clean up before committing their own suicide. The way that they committed this act, it was a book that they had gotten about assisted suicide before. It wasn't Kevorkian. I wish it was Kevorkian.
No, it was, it
was a different guy.
Everyone thinks of that name, but so the guy explained and basically laid out that you would want to use like a strong barbiturate.
Sedative,
mix that essentially. Well, you want to eat some of the applesauce or the pudding because that's where you're going to mix it. Eat that down so there's room for the poison. Get that mixed in. Eat that really, really, really fast. Chug a bunch of vodka because that would actually, I think, jumpstart it in your system, correct? And you would basically just fall asleep. Now, the thing about barbiturates and putting them into these basically induced comas is that it can take a long time for somebody to pass. So after they were essentially asleep, the people that were in the group after them would come around and put plastic bags over their heads.
Secure them. They'd asphyxiate them. After their breath was gone and they had passed away, they would then pull the bags off. They would lay them in bed. As they laid them in bed, they would pose them just arms to their sides. They would take essentially what's a burial shroud, almost a purple burial shroud that would then cover their faces and their chest. Along with that, one thing that they did find, we'll get to it in a second. They did it in 3 shifts. They believed that Marshall was in the second group. So he wasn't one of the final ones.
He was found in the bed of the master bedroom.
Yep. So everybody was found except for 2 people who still had their bags on their heads. I don't believe they might have been in their beds. That part I'm a little wary on. I have this weird memory of being a kid and seeing this because this was back at a time when pretty much anything got thrown on TV. I mean, we saw Rodney King get beat on TV, for God's sakes. Like, they went through this mansion and took videos of all of this stuff and then put it where young prying eyes like mine could see. Just awful visuals in my head.
Right during dinner at 6 o'clock.
Yep. All 39 were dressed in the same black shirts. They had these sweatpants. I've heard differing stories that these were all handmade. I've heard that they were purchased. Don't know which one's true.
I think they were, I want to say that they were handmade. I like to imagine that scenario because they were designed to almost look like, not spacesuits, but kind of like modeled after like Star Trek uniforms a little bit. And they had an insignia and a patch on the arm that said, Heaven's Gate away team. And
in reference to the Star Trek away team.
Yeah, exactly.
This is maybe my favorite part of this whole thing just because this plays into one of my favorite things. Everybody wore black and white Nike Decade shoes. And there have been very few things in the history of shoes that have made a company just completely abandon the thought of making any more shoes in this style or in a style, colorway or anything like that. One of them that comes to mind, this isn't going to matter to 99.9% of the people out here. It was like 2009 or 10 maybe. There was a pair of Jordan 12s that were called the Rising Suns. And on the Rising Sun of the insert for the shoe, there was a picture of the Japanese flag. And the Japanese lost their minds and said, "You can't do this." So as the shoes were sent out with the inserts in them, they actually held the release date back. You had to pull out every single one of the inserts in the shoes and send them back to Nike, and Nike sent you new replacement inserts because the Japanese took such offense to it. Nike, once this all happened, and once all of these videos came out of them going through and showing these bodies wearing the Nike Decade shoes, they halted production and have never re-released one pair of these.
Yeah.
There's a very, very small market. There's a handful of them that are still out there because these weren't top of the line Nikes. These were just something that, funny enough, the reason that they went with these shoes is because Marshall liked Nikes and he was able to get a good bulk discount on buying a bunch of them.
These are dad shoes.
Yeah.
They're dad shoes. They're just like comfort. I'm putting these on. I'm going to the grocery store type shoes.
So these are going online for, anywhere between like $4,000 and $8,000. Just, it's incredible. I would love to get my hands on a pair of these, just not necessarily to celebrate them, but just because it's such a piece of shoe
Can you
lore.
imagine? Okay, insane backlash, but can you imagine if Nike did a Heaven's Gate launch where they just released like 5,000 pairs of those shoes?
Well, they've released similar like skate shoes in like a similar colorway, and people will immediately nickname them the Heaven's Gates. And Nike will come out and be like, nope, that's not what they're called. That's not, it's just this colorway. It has nothing to do with that or anything.
Can you imagine not being able to use the colors in that combination, fucking black and white?
Yeah.
And it was just simple. It was so simple. It was just the swoosh down the side in white, and they were black shoes.
Uncle Phil probably heard about it. It was like, God, it wasn't Air Maxes, was it? And they're like, no. He's like, okay, good. Never mind. We're good. We can, we'll cut that line. That's fine. But yeah, along with that, they had the armbands with the patches that Chris was talking about. They also had a $5 bill and 3/4 in their pockets. There's some made up stuff about this. There's really no kind of true understanding of it. The way that it was described, I think, by somebody afterwards that had affiliations was this $5 bill and 3/4 was some reference to Mark Twain, that he had written something about that's what you needed to board the boat or something like that.
I think he said something about like the cost to heaven is $5.75.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which they've never gone back and been able to really pin down where he said this.
Yeah.
It just makes for a good story. What I heard and what I believe is that this was something that they always carried on them just in case they ever ran into either a ticket for like vagrancy or if they needed to get a ride home. The 3/4 that they had were to make payphone calls in case they needed to be picked up. So I don't really know what else to make of it besides that. We've heard in other myths and legends that people would have like the pennies on their eyes or the coins on their eyes.
For the boatman.
For the boatman. So just a bunch of different things. Who knows what it is. The Sheriff's Department in San Diego County would receive an anonymous tip through a 911 call on March 26th. This was from the Italian guy that he wasn't Italian. He was just of Italian descent. That basically what he said, let me pull it up because it was just a very brief call, but also kind of says a lot. Caller says, yes, I need to report an anonymous tip. Who do I talk to? He calls 911. Oh, his name was D'Angelo was his last name.
One thing too is there's this weird, it makes sense when you're seeing it from the Hale-Bopp comet and the timing and everything like that. Leading up to that point of kind of Applewhite's mindset is this is also during the time in which Waco happens. This is also during the time frame he's seeing what's happening at Ruby Ridge. He even gets to the point where he actually, when they're bringing in new members, is like, if you have any weapons or any guns, go ahead and bring them in. And he's having people learn how to actually use guns and everything.
Well, his insane leap in logic that this could happen to him as well. It's like Ruby Ridge felony that didn't report to the police, didn't show up for his court dates, so the ATF came in on him. Not saying it was right, not saying it was correct, just saying they committed a crime and then didn't.
I mean, that's kind of the standard procedure when you commit a crime and then you don't come and answer for it.
Well, yeah, but then you also have Waco, where you have many felonies being committed as far as guns, sex with kids, all that kind of stuff.
But then not taking the precautions to get the innocent people out and just going in whole hog. Yeah, he's basically seeing, and in his mindset, what can happen to these groups. Because all he's seeing, again, he's maybe seeing it from their side instead of everybody else seeing it from the side of like, they've broken the law. And so I think this does kind of accelerate his idea to actually do this. And then it just happens to lead very conveniently into the Hale-Bopp comet.
Yeah, and there's enough lure around it with whatever looks like it's trailing it as a spaceship, and people believe it that you can kind of pass it on through. So D'Angelo leaves this anonymous tip. Yes, I need to report an anonymous tip. Who do I talk to? The sheriff's department says, okay, this is regarding what? The caller says, this is regarding a mass suicide, and I can give you the address. That's all there was after the address. That's the only thing that the police have to go on. So 2 of the sheriff's department officers go out there. They go in through a side door. They start seeing a fairly clean house that looked well taken care of. And then when they go into the sleeping quarters, they start seeing all these bodies in their beds, realize what it is, have to back out, have to get a search warrant to go in there and do any other work.
That's gotta fuck you up. You've probably seen some shit, especially in San Diego as a cop, but to walk in and just keep opening room after room after room and being like, they're all dead. They all fucking look the exact same. They're all in the same position. Like, what am I fucking in right now?
Well, and there was a point in time where they couldn't even give accurate counts of males and females because they were all dressed the same. They all had the same haircuts.
They had to wait for like the full autopsies and things like that when they could actually look into that.
Everything looked the same. So we talked about Mark and Sarah King. If you have any other questions, anything like that, they still have an email that I hear that they've answered regularly. So if you want to shoot them an email, maybe get some info on them, see what's up.
Have at it.
They're still there.
We hope you don't.
This kind of coincides with something that this will be another cult topic that we talk about a ways down the line. The Order of the Solar Temple. I believe this happened up in Quebec, maybe somewhere up in Canada. There were 5 suicides on March 22nd. Now, again, we're talking March 22nd and 23rd for Heaven's Gate. March 22nd, Order of the Solar Temple kind of follows a similar sort of astrological type theories.
Hale-Bopp's right there.
Yes.
It's like the full moon bringing out the fucking crazies.
There was never really any connection to it as far as that they could link it to. There was never like any crossover between these two cults.
I just think there's enough crazy people to believe in space shit that
it was a major astronomy event. Like it was a major space event. Yeah. People were going to react to it pretty weird. In the months that followed after the mass suicide, there were also another 3 members of Heaven's Gate that would commit suicide just separately. I don't know if it was survivor's guilt. I don't know if it was them trying to still ascend to make it to their destination, to find that next level or what.
They're like, scientists can still see the Hale-Bopp comet through telescopes. They're like, they can still see it.
Yeah,
there's still time. We can still catch it.
It's over Australia. Maybe it's still good. But just the things that came out of this and the reporting, and I can't necessarily say that they're all wrong. I think that there was still brainwashing going on. It was just in a very different way and packaged a different way, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I agree.
At the same time, you also have to feel for all these people because everybody wants to believe in something. And unfortunately, when you run into somebody who has just enough to get you on board, it can lead to a slippery slope. And these people ultimately made this decision on their own, but this decision was almost predetermined by the last X amount of years that they had been going through to prepare for this.
Yeah, they believed something, they trusted in the people in charge to execute it, but then somewhere along the way, the plan for execution changed from, graduating to laying down in bed with a bag over your head to be able to catch a comet out of here.
Yeah, and for as much as I hate to think about it, I hope that these people were happy in their last moments. Like, I hope that...
Judging by those videos, man, that they left, I'm assuming a lot of them were.
The brainwashing, I hope, was strong enough to be able to understand that they were okay with their decision to do this. Just a sad tragedy. We didn't talk a lot about the victims. I guess you can call them victims in this scenario.
We're 2 hours and 50 minutes into this thing, man.
Yeah, if you want to go research them, that's absolutely great. It's just, it doesn't almost feel right to bring this up because this has got to be a dark spot in a lot of people's lives.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of in the same way that you look at the people at Jonestown as the victims, and you look at Jim Jones essentially as the fucking villain. You can look at the same way with fucking, I almost said Dottie, Bonnie and Applewhite. I mean, yeah, these were the people that, knowing what it was going to lead these other people to, still essentially assisted with the mental conditioning that they provided to have these people believe that they weren't actually dying. And we talked about that. They were convinced, these people were convinced that this wasn't death. This was just simply allowing them to ascend and they would reach another consciousness. So in a way, it was just like manipulative homicide.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So yeah, if you take nothing else from this episode, but if you ever, or when you ever hear somebody talking about Heaven's Gate and they start blaming Marshall Applewhite as the guy that did it, remember that Bonnie Nettles was kind of the engine that drove the car.
Yeah, exactly. All right, man, you got anything else?
Nope, I think we're good.
All right, guys, thanks for joining us this week. We'll catch you on the next one.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit them with it.
Our Instagram is Historically High Pod, Historically High POD, and we are on Twitter at Historically High. That's Historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.